My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and I am a forensic accountant for the federal government. My entire career is built on finding hidden money and exposing liars. If you have ever been gaslighted by the person you love most or betrayed by your own family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you will not believe how I turned the tables on the people who tried to destroy my life. The fight started because I noticed the money was gone. Even on maternity leave, my brain never stops crunching numbers. I had logged into our joint checking account to pay the property taxes on the historic brownstone my grandmother left me. Instead of our usual balance, I saw three massive transfers. $50,000 moved to an offshore holding company within the span of a week. When I confronted my husband Marcus about it in our kitchen, I expected a logical explanation. He was an investment director. Moving money was his job, but the look in his eyes was not professional. It was malicious. He cornered me against the kitchen island, his voice dropping into that condescending tone he usually saved for incompetent interns. He told me I was losing my mind. He said the sleep deprivation was making me paranoid. He actually used the words postpartum crazy to my face. He told me my hormones were out of control and that I was hallucinating missing money because I felt inadequate as a new mother. The cruelty in his voice was staggering. This was the man who had held my hand in the delivery room, now using my postpartum vulnerability as a weapon to shut me up. I knew he was lying. Numbers do not lie. But standing there exhausted and overwhelmed, I realized arguing with him was pointless. So I did what he expected a hysterical wife to do. I grabbed my keys, shouted that I needed to get away from him, and slammed the front door. But I did not start the car. I sat in the dark garage, breathing heavily, trying to steady my racing heart. I opened the baby monitor app to make sure the shouting had not woken Leo. The high-definition camera showed the nursery bathed in soft light. Leo was fast asleep in his crib. A moment later, the nursery door opened. Marcus walked in. He did not look angry anymore. He looked incredibly calm. He walked over to the crib, but he did not reach down to soothe our son. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and put it on speakerphone. The audio from the monitor was crystal clear. Two voices answered the call. One belonged to my mother, Vivian. The other belonged to Chad, my younger sister, Chloe's husband. Chad was a wealthy white man from a prominent family who loved to flaunt his status and look down on us. My mother worshipped him because he gave her the illusion of high society prestige. She had always favored Chloe, treating her like royalty while treating me like an inconvenience. But hearing their voices together on my husband's phone made my blood run cold. Marcus chuckled softly into the phone, being careful not to wake the baby. "Do not worry, Vivian," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Maya just stormed out of the house. She is completely unhinged. The psychiatric hold paperwork is almost done. Chad's doctor took care of it perfectly. My mother's voice came through the speaker, crisp and entirely devoid of any maternal affection. "Good. She has always been unstable, Marcus. I told you that when you married her. Once she is committed, you will get full custody of Leo without any messy court battles. She will not be able to fight you from inside a mental health facility." Then Chad spoke, his tone dripping with his usual entitled superiority. "And do not forget the main objective, Marcus. Her grandmother's $4 million historic brownstone needs to be transferred. My shell company is ready to buy it for pennies on the dollar the minute she is declared legally incompetent. You will get your $2 million cut wired directly to Dubai, just like we agreed. Clean up this ghetto financial mess so we can all move on." Marcus laughed again, a sound so evil it made my stomach physically ache. "Consider it done, Chad. She does not suspect a thing. She just thinks she is a terrible mother going crazy." I sat in my car, staring at the screen of my phone, completely paralyzed. The gravity of the betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. My husband, the father of my child, was conspiring with my status-obsessed mother and my racist, greedy brother-in-law to lock me in a psychiatric ward. They were planning to steal my son. They were planning to steal the home my grandmother had entrusted to me simply because she knew Vivian and Chloe were greedy and wanted to protect me. Marcus had been stealing our money to prepare for his escape to Dubai. He was selling my freedom and my child for $2 million. Every single word was a dagger. My mother was helping them do it. She was actively participating in a plot to institutionalize her own daughter. The sheer calculation of it was terrifying. They had paid off a corrupt doctor. They had gaslighted me to make me doubt my own sanity. They had laid a trap so perfect that if I went to the police screaming about a conspiracy, it would only prove their point that I had lost my mind. I was entirely alone, surrounded by enemies I thought were my family. But they made one massive miscalculation. They forgot what I do for a living. I am not a helpless victim. I investigate complex financial crimes. I dismantle criminal networks for the federal government. I know how to gather evidence, and I know how to destroy a person's life legally and permanently. The air in the garage felt thick and suffocating, but my tears never came. Anger is a strange thing. When it reaches a certain temperature, it stops being a fiery explosion and turns into absolute freezing ice. I looked at the baby monitor one last time. Marcus was still standing over Leo's crib, texting on his phone, probably confirming his upcoming flight to Dubai. He looked so comfortable, so completely assured of his victory. He thought he had outsmarted a federal agent. He thought I was just a tired, broken woman who would quietly disappear into a padded room while he walked away with my life. He was dead wrong. I took a deep breath, unlocked my car doors, and prepared to face the monster living in my house. Section 2. 1,000 words. The shock paralyzed me for exactly 10 seconds. Then the cold, clinical part of my brain took over. The part of me that untangled complex money laundering schemes for the federal task force snapped into sharp focus. I turned off the car, gripped my phone, and walked back to the door that connected the garage to the house. I did not storm in with loud footsteps or frantic screams. I moved with absolute silent precision. I walked down the hallway, taking quiet, deliberate breaths to control the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I entered the kitchen and walked straight to the marble island. I slammed my personal phone down onto the countertop with a loud, echoing crack. Marcus jumped violently, nearly dropping his device. He spun around, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He had just hung up the conference call, and the smug, victorious grin on his face instantly vanished. He looked at the baby monitor sitting on the kitchen counter, realizing that I had not driven away. He realized I had heard every single word of his sick, twisted conspiracy. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a cornered animal caught in a trap. For a split second, I saw pure fear. But Marcus was a master manipulator. He knew that if I went to the authorities with my story, his entire life would be over. The fear in his eyes rapidly morphed into something far more dangerous. It was a cold, calculating malice. Without saying a word, he turned and sprinted back toward the nursery. I chased after him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What are you doing?" I demanded, keeping my voice surprisingly steady. He did not answer. He rushed to the crib, where Leo was sleeping peacefully. Before I could reach him, Marcus reached his hand down and pinched our 6-month-old son hard on the leg. Leo jolted awake, letting out a piercing, terrified scream. The sound tore through my chest, an agonizing sound of pure distress. I lunged forward to grab my baby, but Marcus forcefully shoved me back with his shoulder. He scooped Leo up, holding him awkwardly while the baby wailed in pain and confusion. Then Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed 911. He did not look at me. He looked at the wall, forcing his breathing to become rapid and shallow. He was initiating his backup plan. He was going to build the narrative right now. When the emergency dispatcher answered, Marcus unleashed a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Help me, please," he cried into the phone, his voice cracking with manufactured panic. "You need to send police immediately. My wife is having a psychotic break. She is threatening to hurt our baby. I am trying to keep him safe, but she is completely unhinged. She is screaming and throwing things. Please hurry. I think she is going to kill us." He pinched Leo again, making the baby scream even louder into the phone's microphone. "See, listen to him. She is completely out of control. Please send an ambulance and the police. She needs to be committed right now." Any normal person would have panicked. A normal mother would have screamed, cried, and fought him for the baby, which is exactly what Marcus wanted. If the police walked in and saw me screaming and fighting covered in tears, they would instantly believe his story. They would see an unstable, aggressive woman and a protective father. They would put me in handcuffs and drive me straight to the psychiatric ward, exactly as Chad and my mother had planned. But I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not move a single muscle. My federal training overrode my maternal panic. I knew exactly how to handle hostile suspects attempting to manipulate a narrative. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out my secondary phone, a secure encrypted device issued to me by the government for my forensic investigations. I opened the camera app, switched to video mode, and pressed the red record button. I stood in the doorway of the nursery, completely silent, recording my husband. The screen captured everything clearly. It showed Marcus pacing the room, faking his tears. It showed him deliberately hurting our son to make him cry for the dispatcher. Most importantly, it showed me standing 10 feet away, perfectly calm, hands visible, not saying a single word, not throwing a single object. Marcus was so caught up in his performance that it took him a full 30 seconds to notice what I was doing. He turned around expecting to see me crying and begging for my child. Instead, he saw the glowing red light of the recording indicator. He saw the cold, deadpan expression on my face. He froze. The fake sobbing stopped instantly. His mouth hung open as his eyes locked onto the camera lens. He realized in that exact moment that his entire performance was being documented. The dispatcher's voice echoed from his phone speaker, asking for our address and promising that officers were on the way. Marcus stared at my camera, his chest heaving, realizing he had just handed me the very evidence I needed to destroy him and his entire plan. Without saying another word, Marcus abruptly hung up the phone. He stood in the middle of the room, holding our crying son, staring at me in complete silence. The room was heavy with a suffocating tension. I tapped the screen of my phone, ending the video. With a few quick swipes, I uploaded the encrypted file directly to my secure federal cloud server. Even if he tried to wrestle the phone away from me and destroy the device, the evidence was already completely safe. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and finally spoke, my voice devoid of any emotion whatsoever. "Hand me my son," I commanded. Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door as if calculating whether he could run. "Hand him to me right now, Marcus. Or I promise you the police who are on their way will see exactly how you treat infants when you think nobody is watching." Defeated, Marcus slowly walked over and placed Leo in my arms. I immediately began rocking my son, soothing his cries, checking his little leg where his own father had hurt him. Marcus took a step back, trying to formulate a new lie, trying to figure out a way to gaslight his way out of this massive trap. "Maya, listen to me." He stammered, his confident facade completely shattered into a million pieces. "You misunderstood the phone call. Chad and your mother, they were just expressing concern. The money transfers were just investments. I was going to tell you about Dubai." I held my hand up, silencing him immediately. "I do not want to hear your voice," I said coldly. "I want to know exactly how much Chad paid you to sell your wife and child to a psychiatric ward. Did you really think $2 million was enough to buy your way out of federal prison?" Before Marcus could utter another pathetic excuse, the sound of aggressive pounding echoed from the front door. But it was not the police. Through the large window in the hallway, I could see my mother, Vivian, my sister Chloe, and her husband Chad, standing on my porch. And right behind them stood two large men, wearing paramedic uniforms, carrying a heavy canvas straitjacket. They had come to take me away. The nursery air turned toxic the moment Marcus realized I had recorded everything. He lunged at me, his fingers grasping wildly for the device in my hand. His eyes, usually so calm and calculating, were wide with a feral desperation. I sidestepped his heavy frame, clutching Leo tight to my chest with my left arm. My right hand moved with practiced speed. Tap, upload, lock. The biometric scan verified my fingerprint, and the high-definition video of his fake emergency call vanished into a secure federal cloud server. Tap, upload, lock. It was gone. The evidence was safe. The evidence was untouchable. Marcus slammed his hands against the changing table, splintering the polished wood. He turned to me, his chest heaving, his breath whistling through his teeth. "Give me the phone, Maya. Give it to me right now." His voice was a harsh, venomous whisper, intended to stay beneath the volume of our son's cries. Leo was wailing, his tiny face red from the pinch his own father had maliciously given him. I bounced Leo gently, my eyes never leaving Marcus. I watched the man I had married unravel into a violent stranger. "I told you it is already in the cloud," I said, keeping my tone completely flat. "You can break the phone into 1,000 pieces. You can smash it against the wall. You can tear this room apart. It will not matter. The federal server already has it. They have the video. They have your crime." He lunged again, this time grabbing my right wrist with a crushing grip. His fingers dug into my skin, grinding my bones together. The pain flared hot and sharp up my arm, but I did not wince. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. "Let go of me, Marcus," I commanded. My voice did not shake. My voice was a weapon. "You think you are so smart," he hissed, leaning in close, his breath hot against my face. "You think your little government job protects you? You are nothing, Maya. You are a paranoid, unstable burden. Your own mother knows it. She begged Chad to fix this family. She begged him to get rid of you." I twisted my arm sharply against his thumb, breaking his grip using a defensive leverage technique I had learned during my field training. I shoved him backward, forcing him to stumble away from me and our child. My heart hammered against my ribs, pounding a frantic rhythm. Pounding, pounding, pounding. But my mind was absolutely clear. How much I demanded. The question hung in the heavy nursery air. How much did Chad pay you to sell out your wife? How much did he pay you to sell out your child? Marcus rubbed his wrist, staring at me with a mixture of hatred and defeat. He knew he was trapped. He knew the video evidence would put him in a federal penitentiary for fraud and child endangerment. The arrogant investment director was gone, leaving behind a pathetic, greedy coward. $2 million, Marcus spat, his voice laced with venom. $2 million in clean, untraceable cash, and a one-way first-class ticket to Dubai. The confession settled over me like ice. $2 million. My husband had priced my freedom, my sanity, and my son at $2 million. He had priced our entire life together at $2 million. He paced the nursery floor like a caged animal. "I get to leave this miserable life behind," he continued, his tone turning cruel and resentful. "I get to leave you behind. Chad gets the historic brownstone. Your mother gets the baby. And I get my freedom. It was a flawless plan. All I had to do was let the doctors declare you unfit. All I had to do was agree that you were losing your mind. It was so easy, Maya. It was so easy because everyone already believes you are unhinged." I stared at the man I had slept next to for 5 years. The man who had held my hand in the delivery room. The man who had promised to protect us. He was a hollow shell filled only with greed and resentment. "You are going to prison, Marcus." I stated the fact plainly. "You are going to a federal cell and you will never see a single dime of Chad's money. You will never see Dubai. You will never see Leo again." Marcus let out a dark, menacing laugh. He stopped pacing and looked at me, a sickening smirk slowly spreading across his face. He shook his head, his confidence miraculously returning. "You really do not understand how this works, do you?" Marcus taunted. "You think a single video is going to save you. You think your federal title means anything against Chad's connections. You are a black woman holding a phone. Chad is a wealthy white man holding the entire system in his pocket. Who do you think the police will believe? Who do you think the judge will side with?" He took a slow step toward me, his hands sliding into his pockets. "They are going to look at you, Maya, and they are going to see exactly what we tell them to see. An angry, unstable, psychotic woman who needs to be locked away for the safety of her child. Your video will just look like a paranoid delusion." I tightened my hold on Leo, my mind racing through the variables. Marcus was banking on systemic prejudice. He was banking on Chad's money to bury the truth. But Marcus did not know about the federal injunction I had secured. He did not know that my team at the Bureau had already been tracking Chad's shell companies. He thought he was playing chess, but he was merely a pawn on my board. Before I could tear down his false confidence, a violent, aggressive pounding erupted at the front door downstairs. The sound was deafening, echoing up the staircase and vibrating through the floorboards. Bam. 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 The doorbell began to ring incessantly, a shrill panic-inducing noise that made Leo cry harder. Marcus smiled, his eyes lighting up with a predatory gleam. He looked at the door, then back at me. "Right on time," he whispered. The front door burst open. Heavy footsteps thundered across the hardwood floor of the foyer. I heard the sharp, shrill voice of my mother Vivian echoing up the stairs. She was crying out in exaggerated distress, putting on a theatrical performance for the entire neighborhood. "Where is my grandson?" Vivian wailed. "Where is that crazy woman holding my grandson?" The heavy footsteps charged up the staircase. The nursery door swung open with a violent crash. Vivian stood in the doorway, her face twisted into a mask of fake terror. Right beside her stood my sister Chloe, her phone held high, recording the entire scene for her millions of followers. And behind them, looking utterly bored and supremely arrogant, was Chad. But it was the men standing behind Chad that made my blood run cold. Two massive, muscular men wearing dark blue paramedic uniforms pushed their way into the nursery. They did not carry medical bags. They did not carry oxygen or stretchers. One of the men held a heavy, thick canvas straitjacket, its long leather straps dangling menacingly toward the floor. They stepped into the room, effectively trapping me inside. The room froze for a fraction of a second. My mother Vivian immediately launched into her Oscar-worthy performance. She threw her hands in the air, tears instantly streaming down her cheeks, and began wailing loudly to drown out my voice. "Take her away! She has completely lost her mind! She is going to kill my grandson!" Vivian cried, rushing past me to stand near the crib. Chloe shifted her position near the door, raising her smartphone higher to get a better angle. The bright glow of her ring light case reflected in her perfectly manicured nails. "It is so tragic, you guys," Chloe whispered to her live stream, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "My sister is completely unhinged right now. We are just trying to get her the help she desperately needs. Please send prayers for our family." Chad snapped his fingers impatiently at the two massive men in the blue uniforms. "Did you not hear the woman? Restrain her," he ordered. The men stepped closer, their heavy boots thudding against the nursery floor. Marcus scrambled up from where he had been cowering. He wiped away his fake tears and approached me with his hands outstretched, playing the heartbroken, desperate husband for Chloe's camera. "Give me the baby, Maya. Please, do not make this harder than it has to be." He reached for Leo, but his eyes were hard and completely void of empathy. He wanted me to fight back. He wanted a physical struggle to prove his point. I gripped Leo tighter, stepping backward until my spine hit the edge of the heavy oak dresser. The larger man holding the canvas jacket lunged forward. His thick, rough hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. His grip was bruising, designed to intimidate and overpower. I shoved my heel directly into his kneecap, but he barely flinched. Marcus used that split second of physical distraction to rip Leo out of my arms. I gasped loudly, the sudden physical separation from my child hitting me like a violent blow to the chest. My arms felt painfully empty. Marcus immediately handed Leo over to Vivian. She stopped her hysterical crying just long enough to secure her iron grip on the baby before resuming her dramatic wails for the camera. I was now completely empty-handed and entirely surrounded. The second man grabbed my left wrist, twisting it painfully behind my back. They jerked my arms forward simultaneously, preparing to force them into the long, restrictive sleeves of the heavy canvas straitjacket. They truly thought they had won. Chad pulled a leather checkbook from the inner pocket of his tailored suit, wielding it like the ultimate symbol of his perceived superiority. He clicked his expensive designer pen, wearing a look of absolute disgust as he watched me struggle against the two hired thugs. Just go quietly to the facility, Maya Chad stated, his tone dripping with arrogant privilege. I already paid $50,000 for the best private care in the state. An unemployed, unstable black woman is not fit to raise this kid, and she certainly is not fit to manage a $4 million historic property. Let the adults handle the family legacy before you burn it to the ground. Chad had just said the quiet part out loud. He had just admitted his true underlying motive right in front of Chloe's live audience, though. My sister was too busy checking her viewer count to realize the legal implications of his words. Chad wanted my grandmother's brownstone. He genuinely believed his wealth and his status gave him the inherent right to strip me of my inheritance, my freedom, and my child. He looked at me not as a sister-in-law, but as a nuisance occupying real estate he felt entitled to own. I stopped struggling against the two men. I let my entire body go completely limp, forcing the thugs to suddenly support my dead weight. The sudden shift in momentum caught them entirely off guard. Their grips loosened just a fraction of an inch, clearly expecting me to collapse to the floor in total defeat. Instead, I ripped my right arm free with a violent upward twist. I drove my elbow sharply backward, connecting hard with the ribs of the man holding the jacket. He grunted in pain and stumbled backward into Chad, knocking the expensive pen out of his hand. I spun around to face the framed painting hanging directly above the dresser. It was a beautiful vintage portrait of my grandmother. She was the woman who had worked her entire life to buy this property, and she was the woman who had seen right through Vivian and Chloe's relentless greed. She had left everything to me to keep it out of their hands. I reached behind the heavy wooden frame and pressed my thumb against a hidden biometric scanner mounted to the wall. A soft electronic click echoed through the room. The frame popped open on concealed hinges, revealing a dark steel wall safe embedded deep in the plaster. The entire room fell dead silent. Chloe dropped her phone slightly, the ring light dipping toward the floorboards. Vivian stopped her fake crying, instantly staring at the safe with wide, fearful eyes. Marcus took a rapid step backward, clutching Leo tightly against his chest. They expected me to pull out a weapon. They expected a manic, violent reaction that would perfectly validate their entire false narrative. I reached into the dark metal box and pulled out a thick, sealed manila folder. I turned around, slowly smoothing the front of my jacket, keeping my breathing steady and perfectly controlled. I did not look like a woman suffering a psychotic break. I looked exactly like a federal agent executing a raid. I walked directly toward the coffee table in the center of the nursery and dropped the heavy folder onto the glass surface. The loud smack made Marcus flinch violently. "You spent $50,000 on a private psychiatric facility, Chad," I asked, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "That is a massive shame. You really should have spent that money on a better criminal defense lawyer." I looked at the two men in the paramedic uniforms. They were staring at the thick folder, glancing nervously at each other. They were beginning to realize that this job was not what they signed up for. "Open it," I commanded, pointing sharply at the folder. Chad scoffed, refusing to step forward. "I am not touching your paranoid scribblings, Maya. Put the jacket on her right now," he barked at the two men. But the men did not move a single inch. They were staring intently at the official seal of the Department of Justice stamped cleanly across the front of the envelope. "I am a senior forensic accountant for the federal government," I stated, making sure Chloe's phone picked up every single syllable. "That is not a psychiatric hold, that is a federal injunction. And the corrupt doctor who signed your fake commitment papers? The one you bribed to declare me legally incompetent. I submitted his anonymous bribery file to the medical board last week. He is currently under active federal investigation for writing fraudulent prescriptions and taking kickbacks." The color completely drained from Chad's face. His arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer unadulterated panic. He looked frantically at Marcus for help, but Marcus was staring at the floor, looking utterly useless and defeated. I turned my full attention back to the two hired thugs holding the jacket. "My federal task force has been monitoring his communications for months. We know exactly who he sent here tonight, so you have a choice to make right now, gentlemen. Do you want to lose your medical licenses and face federal kidnapping charges, or do you want to walk out that front door and never come back? The two men did not hesitate for a second. They dropped the heavy canvas straitjacket directly onto the nursery floor. They pushed past Chad, nearly knocking him over in their haste to escape the trap. Their heavy boots pounded down the stairs, and a moment later the front door slammed shut behind them. The heavy front door slammed shut, the sound echoing up the staircase and through the house like a gunshot. Then absolute silence. The thick canvas straitjacket lay discarded on the nursery floor, a twisted pile of straps and buckles. The physical threat was gone, but the toxic reality of the room remained. Vivian's mouth hung open in shock. Chloe's smartphone trembled in her grip, the live stream still running, broadcasting the utter failure of their ambush. Marcus backed slowly away from me, his eyes darting frantically toward the hallway, looking for an escape route that did not exist. But Chad did not retreat. Men like Chad never believe they have lost. Men like Chad are insulated by generations of privilege, shielded by a deeply ingrained belief that the world is theirs to control, and that consequences are reserved for other people. He looked at the empty doorway, his jaw clenching, and then he slowly bent down. He picked up his expensive designer pen from the floor, wiped a speck of dust from his tailored suit jacket, and clicked the pen. Click, click, click. The sharp metallic sound cut through the suffocating silence of the room. "You think scaring off two unlicensed contractors changes the reality of this situation?" Chad sneered, stepping deliberately over the discarded jacket. He wielded his leather checkbook like a weapon, waving it in my direction. "I already paid $50,000 to secure a bed in that facility, Maya. $50,000 in non-refundable cash. Do you understand what that means? It means I can buy a new medical evaluation. I can buy a judge. I can buy this entire precinct if I have to. You cannot win a game when I own the board." He looked around the nursery, his lip curling in profound disgust. He looked at the crib, the changing table, and finally at me. "Look at you. You are an unemployed, unstable black woman standing in a nursery, making wild, paranoid claims about federal task forces. You really think anyone in a position of authority is going to let you manage a $4 million historic property? You are completely unfit. You are emotionally volatile. Let the adults handle the family legacy before you burn it to the ground." Chad began to pace, his arrogance swelling, filling the room and pushing the air out of my lungs. "Your grandmother was a stubborn, bitter old woman." He continued, his tone shifting into a lecture, as if he were explaining a simple business concept to a slow child. "But she was not stupid. She left this magnificent brownstone to the one person in the family who lacks the vision to monetize it. She did it to spite them. She knew exactly what Vivian and Chloe were. She knew they were nothing but grifters." Chad did not even look at my mother or my sister as he spoke. He insulted them directly to their faces, his voice laced with absolute contempt. He knew Vivian would leverage the deed for a quick cash loan and lose it to the bank within a year. He knew Chloe would mortgage it to the hilt to fund her fake, pathetic influencer lifestyle. Grifters, leeches, parasites. The words hung in the air. Chad stood in my home, openly despising the people who had brought him here, and they just stood there and took it. Vivian did not defend herself. Chloe did not lower her camera. They were so blinded by their proximity to Chad's perceived wealth that they willingly swallowed his humiliation. They were perfectly content to be his useful idiots as long as they believed a payout was coming. "I am old money," Maya, Chad stated, puffing out his chest, his eyes locking onto mine. "My family knows how to manage real estate assets of this magnitude. This brownstone belongs in the hands of someone who understands its true market value. I offered your mother and your sister a generous, life-changing payout to help me facilitate this transition. I offered your pathetic husband $2 million to simply walk away and let the doctors do their job. It was a clean, efficient business transaction. All you had to do was go quietly to the facility." I stood perfectly still, absorbing the absolute depth of the betrayal. The betrayal was total. The betrayal was absolute. The betrayal was woven into the very fabric of my family. My mother who had carried me for 9 months, who was currently holding my crying son. My sister who had shared my childhood secrets. My husband who had vowed to build a life with me. They had all gathered in my son's nursery to watch me be erased. They had priced my life. They had priced my freedom. They had priced my sanity. And they had traded it all to a man who viewed them as disposable garbage. Old money. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. I stepped away from the heavy oak dresser, moving toward the center of the room. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or cry. I kept my tone dead and clinical. Let us talk about your old money, Chad. Let us talk about the Thornton Family Trust. Chad's arrogant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. His hand gripped the checkbook a little tighter. You like to throw that checkbook around, I said, pointing directly at it. But I am a forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. I track dark money for a living. And I have seen your accounts, Chad. I have seen the federal audits. There is no old money left. The room grew unnaturally still. Vivian looked up from Leo, her brow furrowing in confusion. Your grandfather squandered the real estate portfolio in the 90s. I continued, my voice cutting through his facade like a scalpel. Your father liquidated the remaining stock options to pay off his massive gambling debts. And you drained the last remaining trust fund 2 years ago trying to save your failing tech startup. The color rapidly drained from Chad's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was bankrupt. He was desperate. He was drowning. You are not a billionaire managing a legacy, I stated, stepping right into his personal space, forcing him to look me in the eye. You are a fraud. You are a bankrupt, desperate fraud. You are $11 million in debt, and your creditors are actively petitioning to seize your assets. You do not want my grandmother's brownstone to preserve a legacy. You want it because it is the only unencumbered asset you can steal to save yourself from total financial ruin. I turned my head slowly, looking at my mother, then at my sister, and finally at Marcus. Did he tell you that I asked them, watching the realization dawn on their faces? Did he tell you that the massive payout he promised you does not actually exist? Did he tell you that the first-class ticket to Dubai was bought with a maxed-out high-interest credit card? Chad took a shaky step backward. His checkbook slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. The grand illusion he had built, the promise of endless wealth that had motivated my entire family to betray me, shattered into a million jagged pieces. Vivian stared at the small rectangular piece of leather as if it were a venomous snake. The promised millions, the luxurious lifestyle she had plotted to steal from her own daughter, vanished into thin air. Chloe lowered her smartphone, the bright glow of her ring light illuminating the sudden stark terror on her face. Her live stream was still running, capturing every humiliating second of their failed conspiracy for the world to see. Marcus backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. His dream of a clean getaway to Dubai with $2 million in untraceable cash evaporated, leaving him trapped in a room with the wife he had just attempted to destroy. But the two massive men in the paramedic uniforms had not moved. They stood blocking the doorway, exchanging uneasy glances. They were hired muscle paid to do a dirty job for a wealthy man. But now that wealth was exposed as a complete fabrication, they shifted their weight, their heavy boots creaking against the floorboards, gripping the thick canvas straitjacket with growing uncertainty. I had played the cornered victim long enough. I dropped the remaining traces of the scared, paranoid wife act entirely. I squared my shoulders, feeling the familiar cold precision of my field training take over. I turned my back on the hired thugs and walked deliberately across the room toward a second vintage framed painting of my grandmother hanging near the window. What are you doing? Vivian snapped, her voice trembling as she clutched Leo tighter against her chest. Stop moving around. You are unstable. I ignored her. I reached behind the heavy wooden frame, pressing my thumb against a concealed biometric scanner. The electronic lock clicked, and the frame swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing the dark steel of my secondary wall safe. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavily sealed manila folder. I walked back to the center of the room and tossed the heavy folder directly onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a sharp, authoritative smack. I did not look at Chad. I did not look at my mother. I turned my absolute focus onto the two men blocking my door. That document your bankrupt employer is holding is not a valid psychiatric hold, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. And this folder is not medical paperwork. It is a federal injunction. The larger of the two men frowned, his grip loosening on the straitjacket's straps. Lady, we are just here to do a medical transport. We have the doctor's signature. I am a senior forensic accountant for the federal government. I told them, enunciating every single syllable so there could be no misunderstanding. I track illicit financial networks, offshore accounts, and systemic medical fraud. The doctor who signed your fake commitment papers, the one Chad bribed to declare me legally incompetent without a single evaluation, I submitted his anonymous bribery file to the state medical board last week. The second man took a visible step backward. His eyes darted from the folder on the table to my calm, unwavering expression. He is currently under active federal investigation for writing fraudulent prescriptions and accepting kickbacks from luxury private care facilities. I continued stepping closer to them. My task force has been monitoring his communications. We know exactly who he sent here tonight. We know your names, your unlicensed transport company, and the exact amount of cash Chad promised you for this illegal extraction. The nursery felt like it was shrinking. The air was thick with the sudden realization of just how badly they had miscalculated. So, gentlemen, you have a very simple choice to make right now, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. You can lay hands on a federal agent attempt to force me into that jacket and face immediate federal kidnapping charges. Or you can drop that canvas on my floor, walk out that front door, and pray my supervisor decides you are too insignificant to prosecute. Do you want to lose your licenses and spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary? Or do you want to walk out that door? The decision did not take long. The larger man looked at Chad, who was still staring blankly at his dropped checkbook, completely paralyzed by his own financial ruin. There was no protection here. There was no powerful billionaire to shield them from the law. There was only a desperate broke man who had lured them into a federal trap. We are out, the man muttered. He dropped the heavy canvas straitjacket. It hit the floor with a dull, heavy thud. Hey, Chad! Yelled his voice, cracking with sudden panic. You work for me. I am paying you to secure her. Get back here. But the men were already moving. They shoved past Chloe, nearly knocking her smartphone out of her hand, and scrambled out of the nursery. Their heavy boots thundered down the wooden staircase, driven by the sheer terror of federal prison. A second later, the heavy oak front door slammed shut, shaking the walls of the historic brownstone. They were gone. The physical threat was neutralized. The power dynamic in the room inverted instantly. The predators had suddenly realized they were locked in a cage with the trap already sprung. Chad stared at the empty doorway, his chest heaving, the reality of his complete failure washing over him. His entire plan, built on the assumption that my family's greed would blind them to his manipulation, was in ashes. Marcus slid further along the wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. He looked at the window, evaluating the drop to the garden below. He was doing the math on survival, realizing that the video of him pinching his own child was still securely locked on a government server. Vivian, however, was not a woman who surrendered easily. She had spent her entire life manipulating situations, twisting facts, and playing the victim when her aggression failed. She realized the multi-million-dollar payout was gone. She realized Chad was a fraud. But she still held the ultimate leverage in her arms. She still held my son. Leo was whimpering, his tiny fists clutching the fabric of Vivian's pearl-white Sunday suit. I turned my attention to my mother. I held out my hands, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. The game is over, Mother, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Chad is broke. Marcus is going to prison for child endangerment. Chloe is broadcasting her own conspiracy to commit fraud live on the internet. There is no money. There is no Dubai. There is no private psychiatric facility. Hand me my son. Vivian backed away from me. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped Leo tighter. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated spite. She had lost the brownstone, but she refused to lose face. You ungrateful wretch! Vivian hissed, her voice trembling with rage. I am your mother. I gave you life. You think you can just dismiss me? You think your fancy federal badge makes you better than your own blood? You are sick, Maya. You have always been sick, and you are entirely unfit to raise this boy. Hand him over, Vivian, I repeated, taking a slow step forward. Do not make me take him from you. Chloe finally lowered her phone, realizing the live stream was documenting a crime. Comments were flooding the screen, hundreds of strangers witnessing the collapse of her carefully curated online persona. Mom, maybe we should just give him back, Chloe whispered, her voice shaking with genuine fear. Chad lied to us. We need to leave. Shut up, Chloe. Vivian snapped, her eyes wild. She looked at me, a dangerous, unpredictable energy radiating from her. I am not leaving here empty-handed, Maya. I am taking my grandson to a safe place. If you try to stop me, I will tell the police you attacked me. I will tell them you tried to hurt your own baby. Without warning, she spun around and bolted for the open nursery door. Vivian did not make it 2 steps into the hallway. My federal field training was not just about forensic accounting and auditing ledgers. It included rapid threat assessment, physical intervention, and neutralizing a hostile target before they could escalate a situation. I moved faster than my mother could ever anticipate. I stepped sideways, dropping my right shoulder to anchor my center of gravity, and blocked the doorframe entirely with my body. I slammed my free hand flat against the heavy oak door, pushing it shut with a resounding, violent crack that rattled the picture frames in the hallway. Vivian recoiled sharply, bumping hard into Chad, who was still staring at the floor where his useless checkbook lay. I reached out and ripped my son from her arms. I did not ask. I did not negotiate. I drove my forearm between Vivian's chest, and the baby broke her grip with a sharp twist of my wrist and pulled Leo safely against my own chest. Vivian gasped, her hands grasping at empty air, her face registering genuine shock for the first time all evening. Instantly, Vivian's face underwent a terrifyingly fast transformation. The vicious, hateful sneer she had worn just seconds ago vanished completely. Her eyes widened, filling with fresh, highly manufactured tears. Her shoulders slumped and her voice softened into a pathetic, trembling quiver. "Maya, please!" Vivian sobbed, reaching out a shaking hand toward my shoulder, playing the role of the devastated matriarch to absolute perfection. You have to understand our position. We were just so incredibly worried about you. You have been under so much extreme stress with the baby and managing this huge new house. We genuinely thought you were having a severe mental breakdown. We only wanted to get you professional medical help because we love you so much. We are your family, Maya. We are just trying to protect you. I swatted her hand away with a sharp, dismissive strike. Save the daytime television performance for your wealthy country club friends. Mother, I said, my voice cutting through her fake tears like a steel blade. You were not worried about my health. You were worried about how quickly Chad could liquidate this historic brownstone so you could finally get your percentage. You stood in my home and ordered men with a canvas straitjacket to assault me in my child's nursery. Your concern is a lie, and your love is entirely transactional. Chloe stepped forward, finally lowering her smartphone, realizing her live stream was currently broadcasting multiple federal felonies. Maya, you are being completely unreasonable right now, Chloe shouted, her voice shrill with panic. We are your family. You cannot treat us like criminals. You are trespassers, I stated, staring her down until she took a step backward. And you have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my house before I dial the real police dispatcher and have you all arrested for attempted kidnapping, assault, and trespassing. Chad tried to salvage the last remaining shreds of his dignity. He stood up straight, adjusting the lapels of his tailored suit jacket, trying to project the authority he had entirely lost. You are making a massive, catastrophic mistake. Maya, Chad threatened, his tone desperate. You cannot afford the upkeep on a property of this magnitude on a government salary. When you inevitably default on the property taxes, I will be the one buying this brownstone at the county foreclosure auction. I will take it from you legally. You do not have the credit score to buy a used bicycle right now, Chad, I replied, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Your offshore accounts are frozen. Your remaining domestic investors are filing massive fraud charges against you next week. My financial crimes team made absolutely sure of it. You are a bankrupt ghost, pretending to be a billionaire. Now get out of my house before I press charges for the fraudulent medical paperwork you brought into my home. Chad's jaw worked silently. He had no leverage. He had no money. He had no power. He turned on his heel, yanked the nursery door open, and marched down the stairs. Chloe panicked, realizing her primary source of funding was thoroughly exposed and fleeing the scene. She scrambled after him, her designer heels clicking frantically on the hardwood stairs. Vivian lingered for one final second in the doorway. She looked at me, the loving mother act instantly dropping to reveal the pure venom underneath. You will die alone in this big empty house, Maya Vivian spat. I would rather die entirely alone than live a single day surrounded by parasites, I told her. Get out. Vivian hurried down the stairs. A moment later, the heavy front door slammed shut, vibrating the floorboards beneath my feet. Now it was just me, Leo, and Marcus. The silence in the nursery was absolute. Marcus was standing near the splintered changing table. He looked up at me frantically, attempting to construct a convincing mask of deep remorse. He clasped his hands together in front of him, adopting a posture of total submission. Maya, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking perfectly on my name. I am so incredibly sorry. Chad manipulated me entirely. He convinced me that you were genuinely sick and a danger to Leo. I was terrified. I was just trying to do what was best for our family. You know I love you. You know I would never intentionally hurt you. Please give me a chance to explain. I looked at the man I had married, feeling absolutely nothing but profound disgust. Pack a bag, Marcus, I commanded. He blinked, his fake tears halting immediately. What? You heard me clearly. Pack a single bag. You have exactly 10 minutes to collect whatever clothes and toiletries you need for the week. Then you are walking out that door. Maya, please let us be rational and talk about this like adults, Marcus pleaded, taking a cautious step toward me. We are legally married. We have an infant son. You cannot just throw me out on the street in the middle of the night. I am not throwing you out on the street, I said, bouncing Leo gently until his crying subsided into soft, exhausted hiccups. I am kicking you out of my property. Our marriage is entirely over. I will have my attorney draw up the divorce papers and full legal custody documents by tomorrow morning. Marcus's face darkened. The pathetic, remorseful husband vanished instantly, replaced by the violent, entitled rage I had witnessed earlier. You absolutely cannot do this to me, Maya, he snarled, his fists clenching at his sides. I have legal rights. My name is on that birth certificate. I am a legal resident of this address. If you try to illegally lock me out, I will drag you through family court for the next 10 years. I will demand alimony. I will demand half the value of this brownstone. I will make your life a living hell. I smiled. It was a cold, utterly empty smile. You are forgetting one crucial detail, Marcus. He stopped his advance, eyeing me suspiciously. The video, I reminded him, my voice dangerously soft. The high-definition video currently sitting behind biometric encryption on a secure federal server. The video of you maliciously pinching your own infant son to make him scream in pain. The video of you blatantly lying to an emergency medical dispatcher to orchestrate a fake psychiatric hold against your wife. Marcus swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. If you fight me on this divorce, I said, stepping toward him and forcing him to back away. If you fight me on full custody, if you ever attempt to contact me, approach my property, or demand a single cent of my grandmother's estate, I will send that video directly to the district attorney. I will ensure you are prosecuted to the absolute fullest extent of the law. You will go to a federal prison for child abuse and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. You will lose your corporate job, your pristine reputation, and your freedom. Marcus stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He was trapped. He was completely, utterly beaten. The realization washed over him, turning his face pale and slack. 10 minutes, Marcus, I said, turning my back on him entirely. Your time starts right now. I walked over to the rocking chair by the window and sat down, cradling my sleeping son. I did not watch Marcus leave the room. I listened to the sounds of him rushing down the hallway to the master bedroom. I heard heavy drawers opening and slamming shut. I heard the frantic, desperate zipping of a canvas duffel bag. Exactly 9 minutes later, heavy footsteps descended the main staircase. The front door opened and slammed shut for the final time. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and tapped the security application. The heavy electronic deadbolt clicked loudly into place. I was alone. I was safe. And the house was finally mine. I checked the perimeter of the brownstone, ensuring every window was locked and the security system was fully armed. I carried Leo upstairs to his freshly painted room, the room my family had planned to leave empty. I laid him gently in his crib, watching his chest rise and fall in the soft glow of the nightlight. He was safe. The immediate threat was gone. But the adrenaline still coursed through my veins, cold and sharp. I left the nursery door cracked open and walked down the hall to Marcus's home office. The room smelled faintly of his expensive cologne and stale coffee. I grabbed a stack of cardboard boxes from the hallway closet and began taking his life apart. I packed the customized leather desk set I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. I packed the framed photographs of our vacations to Aspen and Rome. I packed the expensive architectural books he never read. Every item was a lie. Every item was a prop. Every item was evidence of a crime I had not yet fully uncovered. I dumped his belongings into the boxes without care, sweeping his desk clean until nothing remained but his heavy, brushed aluminum laptop. In his panic to pack his clothes and flee the threat of federal prison, he had left his primary workstation behind. He assumed the military-grade encryption would protect him. He assumed a simple password barrier would keep a grieving, unstable wife from looking too closely. He had forgotten exactly what I did for a living. I sat down in his ergonomic leather chair and pulled my keychain from my pocket. Attached to it was a small, unassuming black flash drive containing proprietary decryption software utilized by the Department of Justice. I plugged the drive into the side of the laptop and booted the machine. The screen flared to life, immediately demanding a 20-character alphanumeric passcode. I bypassed the prompt entirely, booting directly from the flash drive. A black command terminal populated the screen, lines of green code scrolling rapidly as the forensic software identified the encrypted partition, isolated the security protocols, and began systematically dismantling them. The progress bar crawled across the screen. I sat in the dark office listening to the quiet hum of the laptop fan and the soft breathing of my son through the baby monitor on the desk. I expected to find a simple digital paper trail. I expected to find a hidden email account or an encrypted messaging app containing his correspondence with Chad. I expected to find a wire transfer receipt for $2 million, the blood money deposited into a Cayman account in exchange for my freedom. The terminal chimed. The encryption shattered. The hard drive unlocked. I bypassed his cluttered desktop and opened the root directory, running a raw data search for Chad's name. A single massive folder appeared at the top of the search results, Project Chad_Launder. I clicked the folder. Dozens of nested subdirectories spilled across the screen. The sheer volume of data was staggering. I opened the first spreadsheet, my eyes scanning the endless rows of categorized transactions. This was not a simple payoff. This was a sprawling, highly sophisticated financial ecosystem. My fingers flew across the trackpad as I opened offshore routing numbers, shell company registries, and real estate acquisition ledgers. I recognized the patterns instantly. Layering, integration, placement. The classic, undeniable architecture of a massive money laundering syndicate. Chad was bankrupt on paper, but he was moving tens of millions of dollars in liquid cash through the Thornton family real estate portfolio. He was using his grandfather's legacy properties as a front to wash dirty money. I cross-referenced the origin routing numbers against the federal databases I had memorized for my job. The money was not coming from failed tech startups. It was coming from known cartel fronts operating out of Central America and Eastern Europe. Chad was not just a desperate fraud. He was an active launderer for international drug syndicates. And Marcus was not just a greedy husband looking for a quick payout. Marcus was his chief financial architect. I opened a file labeled Corporate Entities. It contained the incorporation documents for 8 different limited liability companies registered in Delaware, Cyprus, and the British Virgin Islands. These were the shell corporations holding the laundered cartel cash. I scrolled down to the signature lines on the incorporation documents expecting to see Chad's name. I expected to see Marcus's name hidden behind a proxy. I stopped breathing. The air turned to ice in my lungs. The registered chief executive officer for every single shell company was not Marcus. It was not Chad. It was me. My full legal name, my social security number, my certified digital signature perfectly cloned and applied to hundreds of pages of federal and international banking documents. The absolute scale of the betrayal struck me with the force of a physical blow. The $2 million bribe was a distraction. The entire psychiatric hold was a setup. They were not just trying to steal my grandmother's house. They were building a firewall to protect themselves from the cartel and the federal government. If my task force eventually traced the cartel money back to the Thornton estate, the paper trail would lead directly to me. If the FBI raided these shell companies, they would find my name on every single ledger. And suddenly, the fake medical evaluation made perfect, horrifying sense. If the FBI arrested me for laundering cartel money, my defense would be that my husband and his billionaire friend framed me. But if I was already documented as a paranoid, unstable woman who required a canvas straitjacket and forced institutionalization, my claims would be dismissed as absolute lunacy, a desperate, crazy woman spinning wild conspiracy theories about cartels and federal setups. They were going to lock me in a psychiatric ward, let the federal government seize my assets, and walk away with tens of millions of dollars in clean cartel money while I spent the rest of my life in a federal prison or a padded cell. The betrayal was total. The betrayal was absolute. The betrayal was a masterpiece of financial violence. I stared at my own forged signature glowing on the laptop screen. I did not cry. I did not scream. The shock burned away, leaving behind a cold, terrifying clarity. They thought they had designed the perfect trap. They thought they had built an inescapable maze. They forgot that I was the one who built the software that tears those mazes down. I did not sleep. I sat in the glow of the encrypted laptop screen until the harsh morning light bled through the office blinds, casting long, sharp shadows across the hardwood floor. The scope of the cartel laundering operation was vast, a meticulously constructed financial web designed to ensnare me completely. I had the evidence. I had the raw data. But evidence requires a safe channel for delivery, and right now the very federal agencies I worked for could easily view me as the prime suspect. I needed to secure my immediate resources. I needed a war chest. I pulled my personal laptop from my bag, bypassing the compromised home network, to connect via a secure encrypted mobile hotspot. I navigated to my primary banking portal, typing in my credentials with rapid practice keystrokes. I needed to move my personal savings, the money my grandmother had left me before she died, into an untraceable offshore holding account I maintained for undercover field operations. The portal loaded. The dashboard materialized. Available balance: $0. 0 cents. I stared at the screen. I refreshed the page. The numbers did not change. I clicked into the transaction history. At 3:14 a.m., just hours after I had kicked Marcus out of the brownstone, a massive wire transfer had been initiated. Every single cent of my grandmother's inheritance funds that predated my marriage had been routed through a series of rapid automated transfers into a blind trust. I checked our joint checking account. $0. 0 cents. I checked the emergency savings account designated for Leo's medical and living expenses. $0. 0 cents. Marcus had not just packed a duffel bag when he fled. He had systematically stripped my financial existence bare. He had exploited his access to our joint accounts and bypassed the security on my personal accounts, likely using the same illicit access Chad had provided to forge my signature on the cartel shell companies. He had left me in a $4 million historic property with a newborn son and absolutely no means to buy a single carton of diapers. The cruelty was deliberate. The cruelty was absolute. The cruelty was designed to force me into immediate submission. I reached for my wallet, pulling out my corporate federal credit card. I could use it for emergency rations, though it would flag an immediate audit alert at the Department of Justice. As I pulled the plastic card free, my smartphone resting on the desk beside the cloned hard drive began to vibrate. It was not a phone call. It was a continuous, violent spasm of notifications. The screen lit up. A banner notification from Instagram, then 3 from Twitter, then 50 from TikTok. The notifications stacked and multiplied, overlapping each other in a frantic, rapid-fire sequence that froze the phone's interface. I picked up the device. The direct messages were flooding into my inbox at an impossible rate. I tapped the top message from an anonymous account with no profile picture. "You are a monster. Give that baby to someone who actually loves him." I tapped the next one. "I know where you live. I am calling Child Protective Services right now." "Psycho." I tapped a third. "Watch your back when you leave that house. We are coming for you." The messages poured in. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. A tidal wave of pure, unfiltered digital hatred directed entirely at me. I backed out of the direct messages and clicked on a notification linking to a video that had just crossed 3 million views in under 2 hours. It was Chloe. She was sitting on the floor of what looked like a sterile, brightly lit hotel room. The glamorous influencer aesthetic was completely gone. She wore an oversized plain gray sweatshirt. Her hair was messy and unwashed. Her makeup was deliberately smudged beneath her eyes, giving her the appearance of someone who had been crying hysterically for hours. It was a masterclass in visual manipulation. "Hey guys," Chloe whispered into the camera, her voice trembling, pausing to wipe a perfectly timed tear from her cheek. "I normally only post fashion and lifestyle content here, but I have a family emergency, and I need your help. I am terrified." She looked away from the lens, taking a shaky, dramatic breath. "My older sister Maya has suffered a complete psychotic break. We have been trying to get her professional psychiatric help for weeks. She has been completely unstable, paranoid, and violently aggressive since her baby was born. Last night, my mom, her husband Marcus, and I went to her house to stage an intervention. We brought medical professionals. We just wanted to get her into a safe facility." Chloe leaned closer to the camera, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. "She attacked us. She completely lost her mind. She physically assaulted our mother. She threatened to kill Marcus. He had to flee the house in the middle of the night just to survive. And the worst part is, she has the baby. She is locked inside that huge house, refusing to let anyone in, holding my newborn nephew hostage. The police say their hands are tied because it is a domestic dispute, but she is a danger to herself and that innocent child. Please, if anyone out there can help us pressure the local authorities to intervene, do it. Share this video. Make them listen. We just want to save my nephew before she does something unthinkable." The video ended. I sat perfectly still, the cold light of the laptop illuminating my face. The strategy was brilliant. The strategy was ruthless. The strategy was entirely coordinated. Marcus drained the accounts to cripple me logistically. Chad prepared the fake medical documents to frame me legally. And Chloe weaponized her millions of followers to destroy me socially. They were using the internet to crowdsource my destruction. They knew that if the public believed I was a violent, psychotic mother holding a baby hostage, the police would be forced to conduct a tactical raid on the brownstone. In the chaos of a SWAT raid, my claims about cartel money and forged signatures would be treated as the delusional ravings of a madwoman. I would be arrested, stripped of custody, and thrown into a psychiatric holding cell, neatly solving the cartel's problem. My phone continued to vibrate against my palm, a relentless drumbeat of death threats, insults, and promises of violence. The digital mob was already gathering. They had my name. They had Chloe's fabricated narrative. It would not take long for someone to dox the address of the brownstone. I looked down at the encrypted hard drive containing tens of millions of dollars in illicit transactions. I looked at the baby monitor showing Leo sleeping peacefully. I had no money. I had no public credibility. I had an army of strangers threatening to kill me and a federal target painted squarely on my back. I stood up, sliding the hard drive into the inner pocket of my jacket. I did not panic. Panic was a luxury afforded to people who had a safety net. I walked down the hall to the master bedroom and opened my tactical go bag. If they wanted to play a game of absolute destruction, I would no longer fight from a defensive position. I had barely unzipped the heavy nylon canvas of my go bag when the doorbell rang. It was not a casual chime. It was a rapid, aggressive hammering that vibrated through the floorboards and echoed up the main staircase. I glanced at the security monitor mounted on the bedroom wall. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my front porch. They were flanking a stern woman in a sharp gray pantsuit clutching a thick clipboard. They had moved faster than I anticipated. Chad's high-powered legal team had not wasted a single second. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my racing heart rate down. Panic was the enemy. Emotion was a liability. I walked downstairs and pulled open the heavy oak door. The woman stepped forward immediately, her posture rigid and authoritative. Maya Thornton. I am Agent Davis, with Child Protective Services. We received a Priority 1 emergency anonymous tip reporting severe child endangerment at this address. We need to see your son right now, or these officers will place you under immediate arrest. The system is inherently prejudiced against mothers accused of instability. I knew the rules of this trap. If I raised my voice to defend myself, I was hysterical. If I blocked the door to protect my home, I was combative. If I cried out of sheer terror, I was emotionally unfit. I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. "Come in," I said, my voice dead and completely calm. "My son is upstairs sleeping. We will not wake him, but you may observe him." Agent Davis marched into the foyer, her eyes darting around aggressively, searching for the chaos and squalor she had been primed to find by Chad's expensive lawyers. Instead, she found immaculate hardwood floors, vacuumed rugs, and a perfectly ordered home. "The emergency tip we received claims you have suffered a severe psychotic break," Agent Davis stated, her pen hovering over her clipboard, ready to document my ruin. "The report states you physically assaulted your mother, forced your husband out of the house under threat of violence, and are currently holding your infant hostage in a delusional state." I led them upstairs to the nursery. I pushed the door open just wide enough for the social worker and 1 police officer to look inside. Leo was resting peacefully in his crib, his small chest rising and falling in deep, healthy sleep. Agent Davis peered into the room, her aggressive posture faltering slightly at the sight of the pristine, fully stocked nursery. I quietly closed the door and led them back downstairs to the formal dining room table. "I understand you are legally obligated to investigate anonymous tips," I told her, pulling out one of the heavy dining chairs. "But I am a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. I deal in verifiable documentation, objective evidence, and hard data. I do not deal in internet rumors or fabricated phone calls. Let us look at the facts." I walked to the sideboard and retrieved a thick, heavily tabbed binder. I placed it squarely in front of Agent Davis. "That is Leo's complete medical history," I explained, my tone strictly professional. "Every pediatric appointment, every vaccination record, every growth chart, all signed and verified by the Chief of Pediatrics at Massachusetts General Hospital. Next to it are my own medical records. That includes a comprehensive psychological evaluation I am required to pass annually to maintain my federal security clearance. It was renewed 3 weeks ago. I am in perfect physical and mental health." Agent Davis frowned, flipping slowly through the meticulously organized pages. The undeniable proof was sitting right in her hands. "This directly contradicts the emergency report we received," she muttered. "The caller stated your husband had to flee for his life because you were actively harming the baby." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the secure application linked to the nursery's hidden camera and placed the phone on top of the binder. "My husband did not flee," I stated, locking eyes with her. "He was evicted from this property tonight because he is an abuser. Watch the screen." I pressed play. The high-definition video filled the small screen. Agent Davis and the 2 police officers leaned in. They watched Marcus pace the nursery. They listened to the crisp, clear audio of him dialing 911 and fabricating a story about an unstable wife. They watched in absolute silence as Marcus deliberately reached down and pinched his own infant son to elicit a scream of pain for the dispatcher. The female officer gasped audibly. Agent Davis's face turned a sickening shade of gray. The objective truth was playing out right in front of them, instantly shattering the carefully constructed narrative Chad and Marcus had paid to create. I ended the video. I will be sending that encrypted file to the district attorney tomorrow morning along with my divorce and full legal custody filings, I said. My family is attempting to orchestrate a fraudulent psychiatric hold to gain control of this historic property. They are using you, Agent Davis. They are using your agency and these officers to execute a legal kidnapping. The room was dead silent. The hostile accusatory energy the officials had brought into my home evaporated entirely. Agent Davis slowly closed the binder, her expression shifting from aggressive to deeply apologetic. Mrs. Thornton, she began, her voice softening. This evidence is substantial and highly disturbing. However, due to the extreme public visibility of this case and the massive influx of calls we are currently receiving because of a viral social media video posted by your sister, I cannot legally close this file today. The bureaucratic investigation must remain officially open. I will note in my preliminary report that the child is safe, the home is secure, and the mother is cooperative and presents no danger. But you need to be prepared. This process is not over. I understand, I replied, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. I will cooperate fully with any scheduled visits. I escorted them to the door. The officers apologized quietly for the intrusion. Agent Davis handed me her business card and stepped out into the cold night air. I closed the heavy oak door and turned the electronic deadbolt. The moment the lock clicked, the adrenaline that had been sustaining me for the past 24 hours vanished. The clinical, detached federal agent persona dissolved, leaving only a terrified, exhausted mother standing in a silent hallway. My legs gave out completely. I slid down the front door until I hit the floor, pulling my knees tightly to my chest. They had almost taken him. The realization was a suffocating, physical weight pressing down on my lungs. If I had not installed that hidden camera, if I had reacted with justifiable anger instead of cold logic when the social worker arrived, if I had shown even a fraction of the sheer terror I was actually feeling, they would have walked out of this house carrying my son. They would have handed my baby over to a man who pinched him for leverage. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, fighting a wave of total paralyzing panic. My family had weaponized the entire world against me. They had turned the internet into a digital lynch mob. They had turned the state into an accessory to abduction. The psychological toll of fighting a war on every single front was breaking me apart piece by piece. I was exhausted, I was isolated, I was profoundly alone. I sat on the hardwood floor and let myself cry. I cried for the mother who had sold me out for a payout. I cried for the sister who was actively trying to destroy me for internet fame. I cried for the husband who had turned out to be a cartel associate and a monster. The tears came hot and fast, shaking my entire body. I was pushed to the absolute brink, hovering dangerously on the edge of the exact breakdown they had accused me of having. But as I sat there in the dark, the sound of a soft, steady whimper echoed from the baby monitor in my pocket. Leo was waking up. He was hungry. He needed me. The tears stopped instantly. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. The brief moment of despair evaporated, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve that settled deep in my bones. They wanted to take my son. They wanted to take my freedom. They wanted to take my life. I pushed myself up from the floor, my hands steady once again. The time for defending myself was over. 48 hours later, I stepped out of the high-speed elevator and into the opulent mahogany-paneled reception area of Chad's corporate law firm. The air up here on the 50th floor smelled of expensive leather-fresh orchids and manufactured intimidation. My presence in this building was not a choice. It was the direct result of systematic financial and psychological starvation. Marcus had executed his digital theft with ruthless efficiency. My bank accounts remained frozen at zero. My credit cards were immediately declined every time I attempted to purchase groceries, diapers, or formula for Leo. I was living on the few $100s of emergency cash I kept hidden in my tactical bag. I was completely cut off from the world, isolated by a coordinated digital smear campaign that had turned my name into a viral trending topic for all the wrong reasons. Chloe's heavily edited, tearful TikTok video had done exactly what it was designed to do. I was receiving thousands of death threats daily from absolute strangers who believed I was a psychotic, abusive monster holding my own infant hostage. The psychological toll of the CPS investigation, the constant fear of a tactical police raid, and the sheer exhaustion of fighting a war on every front had pushed me to the absolute brink of human endurance. They expected me to walk into this mediation meeting as a shattered, weeping mess. They expected a woman desperate to surrender everything just to make the nightmare stop. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the primary conference room. They were sitting in a row on the opposite side of a massive polished marble table, lined up like an execution squad. Marcus sat in the center, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, his posture radiating the false confidence of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted a federal agent. To his left sat my mother Vivian and my sister Chloe. They were dressed immaculately, sipping sparkling water, looking down their noses at me with expressions of supreme, unconcealed victory. Chloe had her smartphone resting on the table face up, undoubtedly recording audio, to selectively edit for her next viral update. At the head of the table sat Chad. He leaned back in a high-backed ergonomic chair, his hands steepled beneath his chin. He wore a bespoke navy suit and a platinum watch that caught the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked exactly like the billionaire real estate mogul he pretended to be, completely unaware that I had spent the last 2 nights dissecting his international cartel money laundering syndicate down to the last decimal point. I did not speak. I walked to the opposite side of the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. I placed my hands flat on the cool marble, keeping my face completely devoid of emotion. "Thank you for finally seeing reason and agreeing to this mediation." Maya Chad began, his voice dripping with condescension. "We wanted to keep this out of the public court system to spare you any further humiliation. The viral videos are unfortunate, but they are simply a reflection of your current mental instability. We are here today to offer you a lifeline." Marcus leaned forward, adopting a tone of deep artificial sorrow. The performance was sickeningly smooth. "Maya, you have to understand that we are doing this for your own good," Marcus said, looking at me with wide, fake eyes. "You are severely unwell. The manic spending episodes, the secret accounts you opened, the massive amounts of debt you have accrued without my knowledge. It has to stop. You have jeopardized our family's entire future. You have jeopardized Leo's future. We are trying to keep you out of a federal penitentiary for fraud." I stared at him, feeling a dark, icy amusement twisting in my chest. He was projecting his exact crimes onto me. He had drained my accounts, forged my signature on cartel shell companies, and orchestrated a massive financial fraud. And he was sitting in a luxury conference room accusing me of manic spending. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. Vivian sighed loudly, placing a manicured hand over her heart. "We are your family, Maya. We clean up our own messes, even the terrible ones you create. We just want you to get the psychiatric help you so desperately need before you hurt yourself or that poor baby again." I maintained absolute silence. I let them fill the room with their lies. I let them dig their graves deeper with every word they spoke. Chad smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression. He reached into a leather portfolio resting on the table and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid the heavy cream-colored paper across the polished marble. The pages stopped exactly in front of my hands. "This is a comprehensive settlement agreement and a quitclaim deed transfer." Chad explained, his tone brisk and entirely businesslike. "Marcus has legally petitioned to take full assumption of the debts you accrued during your manic episodes. In exchange, you are signing over the deed to the historic brownstone. The property will be transferred directly into the holding portfolio of my primary real estate corporation." I looked down at the top page of the contract. The purchase price listed for a $4 million fully renovated, historically protected piece of prime Boston real estate was clearly printed in bold black ink. $1. They were attempting to legally steal my grandmother's legacy, the only secure asset I owned for a single dollar, under the guise of paying off phantom debts. They were using the threat of a fabricated psychiatric evaluation and a viral internet mob to force me into signing away my entire financial future. Once you sign that document, Chad continued, lacing his fingers together, Marcus has agreed to halt all immediate legal proceedings regarding full custody of Leo. He will allow you supervised visitation once you are released from the inpatient psychiatric facility we have selected for you. Chloe picked up her smartphone, turning the screen toward me so I could see her social media dashboard. The notification counter was a blur of constant motion. "Everyone hates you, Maya," Chloe sneered, her voice vicious. "You are a terrible mother. You are a terrible wife. You have absolutely nothing left. Just sign the paper and go to the hospital. If you fight this, I will post the next video, and I promise you the police will be breaking down your door in an hour." I looked at Chloe. I looked at Vivian. I looked at Marcus. They were parasites feeding on a dying host, completely unaware that the host was not actually dying. I finally shifted my gaze to Chad. He was watching me with an expression of supreme, untouchable arrogance. He genuinely believed he had won. He genuinely believed that a middle-class forensic accountant was no match for his inherited wealth and corporate power. "I am taking on an immense liability here," Maya Chad stated, shaking his head slowly, as if burdened by his own generosity. "That building is a decaying money pit. The property taxes alone are astronomical. But Marcus begged me to help you out of this hole you dug for yourself. Consider this an act of extreme charity." He leaned across the marble table, a cruel, mocking smirk twisting his features. He lowered his voice, delivering the final, calculated insult he believed would break my spirit completely. "You should be thanking me on your knees right now," Chad whispered. "I am a white savior cleaning up your family's ghetto financial mess. Be grateful I am even offering you a pen." The silence in the conference room became absolute. The sheer, blatant racism of the remark hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Marcus looked slightly uncomfortable, but remained entirely silent. Vivian and Chloe offered no objections. They were perfectly willing to let this man degrade their own blood if it meant securing their financial payout. I looked down at the contract resting under my hands. I looked at the pen Chad had placed beside it. I felt the smooth, cold metal of the flash drive resting heavily in the inner pocket of my jacket. The drive containing the complete, unredacted financial architecture of Chad's international cartel laundering operation. The drive containing the forged signatures tying Marcus to federal racketeering charges. I did not reach for the pen. I placed my hands flat on the table, locked eyes with Chad, and smiled. But the smile did not hold. It was a brittle, fragile crack that I allowed to shatter across my face, the very picture of a woman whose grip on reality was finally snapping under the crushing weight of her circumstances. I let my hands slip from the cool marble table, my shoulders collapsing inward. I needed them to believe they had won. I needed them to feel so entirely secure in their absolute victory that they would blindly walk into the federal snare I was about to trigger. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a ragged, wet gasp from the back of my throat. My chest began to heave. I dropped my head into my hands, letting my shoulders shake with violent, manufactured sobs. "Please," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. I looked up, tears spilling over my lashes, completely abandoning the poised federal agent they feared, and adopting the persona of the hysterical, broken housewife they expected. "Please, Marcus, do not take my baby. I will do whatever you want. Just do not let them take Leo." I hyperventilated, clutching at the collar of my blouse as if I could not breathe. The sound of my own desperate weeping echoed off the mahogany walls of the conference room. I looked at my mother, reaching a trembling hand out to her across the massive table. "Mom, please help me," I begged, letting my voice dissolve into a pathetic whine. "I do not want to go to a hospital. I am not crazy. I am just so tired. I am so tired of fighting." Vivian recoiled, physically pulling her heavy leather chair back from the table as if my distress was highly contagious. She looked at me not with a mother's pity, but with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Pull yourself together, Maya," Vivian snapped, exchanging a triumphant glance with Chloe. "You are embarrassing yourself in front of Chad. This is exactly the manic, unpredictable behavior we are trying to manage." Chloe had her smartphone aimed directly at my face, undoubtedly capturing every single second of my staged humiliation. She was already mentally drafting the caption for her next viral update, ready to feed my fabricated breakdown to the digital mob calling for my head. "It is over," Maya Marcus said. He leaned back and crossed his arms over his tailored chest, looking like a king surveying his conquered land. "Just sign the deed. Let Chad handle the massive debt you accumulated. Go get your head straight in the facility, and maybe in a few months I will let you have supervised visitation with our son." I let out a loud, agonized wail, dropping my face back into my hands. "I will sign it," I choked out between heavy, calculated gasps. "I will give you the brownstone. I will give you everything. Just please give me a little bit of time." I looked up at Chad, projecting the ultimate image of a completely defeated woman begging for a final scrap of mercy. "Give me 3 days," I pleaded, wiping a stream of tears from my chin. "My grandmother's things are still in the attic. Her wedding china, the old family photo albums, her jewelry. Please, Chad. I just need 72 hours to pack her sentimental items before I sign the deed and check myself into the hospital. Let me say goodbye to my home." Chad let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. He looked at Marcus, shaking his head in sheer amusement at my display. He was a billionaire predator, and I was just another weak, emotional casualty he had successfully crushed beneath his expensive Italian shoes. 3 days, Chad scoffed, checking his platinum watch. "You want 72 hours to pack up some dusty teacups and old photographs while I am actively saving you from a federal penitentiary." "Let her have it, Chad," Marcus interjected, his voice slick with arrogant magnanimity. "She is losing her mind. If 72 hours gets her signature on that deed without us having to drag her kicking and screaming into a psychiatric transport van, it is worth the delay. Besides, she has no money. I made sure her cards are frozen. She cannot go anywhere. She cannot do anything." Vivian sighed loudly, adjusting her designer silk scarf. "Just give her the time, Chad. She has always been overly attached to that old junk. Once she signs the paperwork on Monday, we can finally breathe easily and put this ugly chapter behind us." Chad stared at me, his eyes full of absolute contempt. He genuinely believed that a middle-class forensic accountant was no match for his inherited wealth and corporate power. "Fine," Chad declared, tossing his expensive metal pen onto the contract. "You have exactly 3 days, Maya, 72 hours. On Monday morning, you will walk back into this office, you will sign this deed, and you will surrender yourself to the medical transport team we have arranged. If you try to delay, if you try to run, or if you attempt to contact the authorities with your paranoid delusions, I will personally ensure you never see your son again." I nodded frantically, letting out fresh tears of profound gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you, Chad. I will be here. I promise." I gathered my bag with clumsy, shaking hands, deliberately dropping my keys on the floor to amplify the illusion of my complete psychological collapse. Chloe snickered loudly as I scrambled to pick them up from the plush carpet. "Do not forget to pack a toothbrush for the psych ward," Chloe taunted as I stumbled toward the heavy glass doors. I pushed through the doors and rushed out into the reception area, keeping my head bowed, my shoulders shaking with simulated sobs as I hurried past the staring receptionists and security guards. I stepped into the private executive elevator and hit the button for the subterranean parking garage. The heavy steel doors slid shut, sealing me inside the polished stainless steel box. The transformation was instantaneous. I stood up straight, my spine snapping into perfect, rigid alignment. The trembling vanished entirely. The frantic, erratic breathing smoothed into deep, controlled, rhythmic breaths. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a tissue, and calmly wiped the manufactured tears from my cheeks. My reflection in the mirrored elevator doors showed no trace of a broken manic housewife. It showed a lethal, highly focused federal agent who had just been handed the exact window of time she needed to execute a flawless strike. 72 hours. They had given me 72 hours of unmonitored freedom because they believed I was completely powerless. They believed Marcus had paralyzed me by freezing my personal bank accounts. They did not know that a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Justice does not rely on a joint checking account when going to war. I walked out of the elevator into the dim parking garage, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete. I bypassed my usual civilian sedan and unlocked the unmarked, heavily tinted government-issue SUV I had requisitioned from the federal motor pool that morning. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and pulled my encrypted smartphone from my tactical bag. I ignored the thousands of death threats still flooding my social media accounts from Chloe's weaponized followers. I opened a secure dark web communication channel and dialed a heavily restricted internal government number. It rang exactly twice. "Julian," I said, my voice ringing with cold metallic authority. Maya Special Agent Julian responded, his tone strictly business cutting through the static of the secure line. "I assume you have the package. I have the complete financial architecture of Chad Thornton's international cartel laundering syndicate." I confirmed, pulling out of the parking garage and merging aggressively into the heavy Boston traffic. "I have the offshore routing numbers, the shell company ledgers, and the forged incorporation documents bearing my stolen signature. I also have definitive high-definition video proof of domestic financial fraud and conspiracy perpetrated by Marcus." "Are you secure?" Julian asked, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background. "They gave me 72 hours to pack my grandmother's sentimental heirlooms." I replied, a dark, genuine smile finally returning to my lips. "They currently believe I am suffering a total psychological breakdown." "Where are you right now?" "I am 10 minutes away from the federal building," I stated, pressing my foot down hard on the accelerator. "Assemble the strike team, Julian. We are tearing them down today." I drove straight through the financial district, bypassing my own neighborhood entirely, and pulled into the secure underground parking garage of the John F. Kennedy Federal Building. I flashed my credentials at the armed guard before easing the heavy vehicle into a reserved spot. I cut the engine, but I did not unbuckle my seatbelt. The tactical strike on Chad's financial empire was already in motion, with Special Agent Julian waiting upstairs. But freezing assets behind closed doors was not enough. They had weaponized the public against me. I needed to execute their downfall on the exact same stage. I tapped the screen of my encrypted smartphone and dialed my mother's number. As the line rang, I closed my eyes and forcefully altered my physiology once more. I hunched my shoulders, constricted my vocal cords, and drew rapid, shallow breaths until my chest ached. "Hello, Vivian," answered her tone sharp and annoyed. "Mom," I breathed into the receiver, letting a pathetic wet sob punctuate the word. "It is Maya. Please do not hang up." A heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. "What is it now, Maya? I am currently selecting floral arrangements for Chloe and Chad's charity gala this weekend, and I do not have the patience for your manic episodes today." I swallowed hard, projecting utter defeat. "No, Mom. No more drama. I am calling to tell you that you were right. You were right about everything. I cannot keep fighting you or Marcus or Chad. I just want to do exactly what you told me to do." The silence on the other end was deeply satisfying. I could practically hear Vivian swelling with toxic pride. She loved nothing more than absolute submission. "I told you this would happen," Vivian said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I told you that you could not handle the real world without us. You always were the weak link in this family, Maya. You lack the pedigree, the stamina, the sheer class that Chloe has effortlessly cultivated. It is about time you recognized your place." "You are right," I whimpered, making myself sound as small and insignificant as possible. "That is why I want to sign the deed over publicly. I want to do it at the charity gala this Saturday. I want to show everyone that I support the family legacy. I want to show Marcus that I am ready to be cooperative so he will let me see Leo again." I paused, drawing a ragged breath. "I want to hand Chad the deed in front of his peers. It can be framed as a massive charitable donation to his foundation. It will make him look like a hero stepping in to manage a historic property for the good of the city. And it will prove to the entire community that I am accepting help." I held my breath, waiting for her greed and her insatiable need for public validation to override whatever basic common sense she possessed. It did not take long. Vivian gasped softly, the implications of such a grand public display of power intoxicating her instantly. A public surrender in front of the city's most powerful people was her ultimate narcissistic fantasy. That is actually a brilliant idea, Vivian murmured, her voice vibrating with excitement. Chad will look incredibly magnanimous. A true philanthropic savior rescuing a distressed historical asset from his unstable sister-in-law. It will completely overshadow those ridiculous rumors floating around the internet. It proves we are a family that handles our burdens with grace. She took a sip of her drink, the ice clinking loudly against the glass. You are finally showing a shred of usefulness, Maya. I always knew you would eventually bow down to your betters. You simply do not have the intellectual capacity to outmaneuver men like Chad or Marcus. It is a relief to see you finally accepting your limitations. Buy a decent dress from a discount rack and show up at the Harbor Hotel ballroom at 8 o'clock sharp this Saturday. Do not embarrass us. I will not, Mom, I whispered. I will give you exactly the show you deserve. I ended the call. The second the screen went black, the fragile weeping daughter vanished. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and stared out through the tinted windshield. My breathing was perfectly steady. The trap was set baited with the one thing they could never resist, their own monumental ego. I grabbed the encrypted flash drive, feeling the sharp metal edges bite into my palm. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted a grand transfer of power in front of the district attorney, the mayor, and the corporate elite. They were going to get one. I opened the heavy door of the SUV and walked purposefully toward the secured elevator banks to meet Special Agent Julian. It was time to pull the trigger. I watched the realization settle completely over Julian's features, replacing his initial shock with the cold, calculating precision of a federal predator who had just been handed the perfect bait. We did not need to kick down doors in the dead of night. We needed to let them walk onto a lit stage and confess in front of the entire city. Julian turned back to the dual monitors, his fingers moving rapidly across the illuminated keyboard as he began pulling the deeper archived files from the cloned hard drive. Now that we knew the destination, we needed to map the exact route of the digital blood money. Let us look at the architect of this disaster, Julian said, pulling up a series of heavily encrypted legal documents originating from a private wealth management firm in Geneva. Chad has spent years cultivating the persona of a Boston aristocrat. He throws his family name around like a loaded weapon. But look at these severance decrees. I leaned in, scanning the dense legal jargon. The documents were ironclad. 10 years ago, the Thornton Family Trust had officially and permanently severed all ties with Chad. They had stripped him of his inheritance, removed his name from the corporate board, and locked him out of the family's billion-dollar shipping fortune. He had been quietly excommunicated for severe financial malfeasance, left to fend for himself with absolutely nothing. He is completely destitute, I stated, staring at the zeros lining his legitimate bank accounts. Every luxury car, every custom suit, the penthouse office, it is all a hollow facade funded by short-term catastrophic debt. He is running a lifestyle Ponzi scheme, and the bill has finally come due. Julian nodded, bringing up the routing numbers associated with the Sinaloa syndicate. He did not just borrow money to keep up appearances, Maya. He borrowed it from the absolute worst people on the planet. He owes the cartel $70 million. This charity gala is not a philanthropic endeavor. It is a desperate life-or-death laundering operation. He has to wash that $70 million and return it to them as legitimate capital, or he is a dead man. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. My mother and sister worshipped Chad because they believed he was their ticket into high society. They had sold me out, participated in my psychological torture, and attempted to steal my child, all for a piece of a fortune that did not actually exist. They were aligning themselves with a man who was actively being hunted by an international crime syndicate. But the most insidious part of the operation was the role they had forced upon me. I pulled up the secondary incorporation documents for the Thornton Global Initiative. The charity was registered as a massive urban redevelopment fund designed to funnel millions into distressed properties. Look at the compliance requirements for the holding company, I pointed out, tracing the specific clauses Chad's lawyers had buried in the fine print. To move $70 million through a domestic charity without triggering immediate federal flags, they need an anchor asset. They need a physical high-value property with a flawless chain of title and a historically protected tax exemption. My grandmother's brownstone is the perfect vehicle, and they need a clean name to attach it to. Julian added, his voice grim. Chad's financial history is toxic. Marcus is already flagged for suspicious domestic transfers. Chloe and Vivian have zero corporate credibility. But I am a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. I said, the cold truth settling deep into my bones. I have an active federal security clearance. I have a flawless financial record. If I sign that quitclaim deed and transfer my property into their holding company, my biometric signature instantly validates the entire corporate structure. I become the registered principal director of the charity. Julian looked at me, his eyes dead serious. The second that cartel money moves through the foundation, you become the legal kingpin of an international money laundering syndicate. When the DEA and the FBI inevitably raid the operation, Chad disappears. Marcus claims ignorance. The entire paper trail, every forged document, and every ounce of federal liability stops directly at your desk. You would be looking at a minimum of 30 years in a federal penitentiary. The absolute calculating malice of my husband and my family was staggering. They were not just trying to take my home. They were not just trying to take my son. They were actively constructing my permanent destruction so they could walk away with a payout. Marcus had manufactured the narrative of my mental instability, not just to win custody, but to discredit anything I might say when the federal agents finally came to arrest me. A manic, delusional woman, claiming she was framed by her family, would never be believed by a jury. It was a flawless, airtight trap. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated the target. "We need to lock down the parameters for Saturday night," I said, my voice completely devoid of fear. "I want undercover agents positioned at every exit of the Harbor Hotel ballroom. I want a digital surveillance team tapped directly into Chad's offshore routing accounts. The second his proxy attempts to initiate the transfer of the cartel funds during the gala, we freeze the servers." Julian was already pulling up the architectural blueprints for the hotel. "We will pose agents as catering staff, valet drivers, and private security. We will wire the VIP suite where the deed signing is supposed to take place. I will equip you with a subdermal audio transmitter. Every word they say to you will be recorded and broadcast directly to our mobile command center in the parking garage." We spent the next 6 hours dissecting the operation down to the second. We mapped out the flow of the dirty money, the exact individuals Chad was using as proxies, and the specific federal statutes we would use to seize every single asset tied to the conspirators. We were not leaving a single loophole. We were building a concrete wall around them, and they were going to walk right into it. When we finally finished the tactical briefing, the harsh fluorescent lights of the SCIF felt like a spotlight. Julian handed me a small encrypted communication device, no larger than a key fob. "They think they broke you today, Maya," Julian said, his tone carrying a deep professional respect. "They think you are walking into that gala as a defeated victim." I slipped the device into my pocket, smoothing the fabric of my jacket. "Let them believe it," I replied, my voice hard and steady. "Let them enjoy their champagne and their false victory. They wanted a public surrender. I am going to give them a public execution." I left the federal building and stepped out into the freezing Boston night. The city lights blurred against the dark sky, reflecting off the wet pavement. I walked to my vehicle, my mind clear, my heart encased in ice. The tears, the panic, the desperation vanished entirely. I had exactly 48 hours left until the charity gala. 48 hours until I walked into a room full of monsters and burned their entire world to the ground. Before I burned it all down, there was one last ghost I needed to lay to rest. I needed to look into the eyes of the man I had slept next to for 6 years and find out if there was even a fraction of a human soul left inside him. Special Agent Julian Miller had advised against it, warning me that contacting Marcus could spook him or compromise the surveillance perimeter we were establishing around the hotel. I assured Julian that Marcus's arrogance was a terminal condition. My husband would never pass up an opportunity to gloat over my perceived defeat. I texted Marcus from a secure burner phone, begging for 10 minutes of his time at a small independent coffee shop on the edge of the financial district. It was a quiet place we used to visit when we were first dating, back when I thought his relentless ambition was a virtue rather than a weapon. I told him I needed to discuss the logistics of Leo's care before the charity gala. I arrived early and took a secluded booth in the back facing the door. Underneath the collar of my simple wool coat, a microscopic federal transmitter hummed quietly against my collarbone, broadcasting an encrypted audio signal directly to Julian's tactical team. Every breath, every shift of fabric, and every word spoken in this booth was feeding straight into a Department of Justice server. Marcus walked in exactly 14 minutes late. He was wearing a brand new custom-tailored Italian suit that cost more than my first car. His hair was perfectly styled, his posture radiating an aura of unearned superiority. He looked around the modest, slightly worn coffee shop with undisguised distaste before spotting me in the corner. He slid into the booth opposite me, not even bothering to remove his expensive designer sunglasses. "Make it fast, Maya," he demanded, checking his heavy platinum watch. "I have a final fitting for my tuxedo in half an hour, and I do not want my clothes smelling like cheap roasted beans when I get there." I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. I did not manufacture tears this time. I looked at him with quiet, genuine exhaustion, offering him one final, desperate lifeline. "Marcus." I began, keeping my voice low and steady. "Please. I am signing the house over to Chad tomorrow night. I am giving your family everything they want. I am surrendering completely. But I am asking you, as the father of our child, do not do this to Leo. You know what Chad is really doing behind the scenes. You know the kind of danger attached to that syndicate money. Take Leo and walk away with me today. We can disappear. We can start over." Marcus let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a cruel barking sound that caused a few patrons at the counter to turn their heads. "Start over with you," he scoffed, pulling off his sunglasses to glare at me with absolute contempt. "Why on earth would I do that? You have always been completely unlovable, Maya. You are boring, you are rigid, and you have exactly zero ambition. Marrying you was the most exhausting chore of my life. The only reason I stayed as long as I did was because your grandmother had the good sense to die and leave you a highly liquid $4 million asset." He leaned across the table, his expensive cologne masking the comforting scent of the coffee shop. "You really think I care about what happens to you? Or that stupid historic brownstone?" he sneered. "Chad paid me $2 million in clean, untraceable offshore cash just to manufacture this little domestic crisis. He needed a distraction. He needed you panicked, and he needed a naive scapegoat to sign that property transfer to legitimize his charity." I delivered perfectly. My heart slowed to a steady rhythmic beat. The transmission was capturing it all. Every vile, arrogant confession was being logged as federal evidence. "And what about Leo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He is your son, Marcus." He waved his hand dismissively, brushing off the fate of his own child like a minor inconvenience. "Leo will be fine. Your mother is taking him. Vivian is absolutely thrilled, honestly. She says she finally gets a chance to raise a child correctly without your mediocre genetics getting in the way. She and Chloe are going to turn him into a proper Thornton. He will go to the right Swiss boarding schools and learn how real power works." I stared at him. The man I had once vowed to spend my life with was handing our toddler over to a narcissistic grandmother and an international money laundering syndicate, all for a payout. "You are giving our son to Vivian," I stated, making sure the audio feed picked up the exact parameters of his betrayal. "And what exactly are you going to do while I go to a federal penitentiary for Chad's cartel laundering?" "I am taking an Emirates first-class flight to Dubai on Sunday morning." Marcus smiled, leaning back against the red vinyl booth. "Chad bought me a one-way ticket. I have a luxury penthouse waiting for me in the Marina District, $2 million in a secure account, and absolutely zero ties to the financial implosion that is about to ruin your life. I will be sitting on a private beach while the FBI kicks down your door, so no, Maya. I am not walking away with you. I am leaving you exactly where you belong, in the dirt. He checked his watch again, clearly bored with my presence. Just make sure you do not ruin the gala tomorrow night, he added, sliding out of the booth and standing over me. Show up, smile for the camera, sign the paperwork, and surrender quietly. If you try anything stupid, I will personally make sure Vivian cuts off all your visitation rights permanently. Goodbye, Maya. Have a nice life behind bars. He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the brass bell above the door chiming merrily as he stepped back into the freezing Boston air. I sat alone in the booth for a long time. The coffee in front of me grew entirely cold. Any lingering trace of heartbreak, any microscopic shred of grief I still held for my broken marriage evaporated. It burned away instantly, leaving behind a vast echoing chamber of absolute cold-blooded resolve. Marcus had just handed the federal government a recorded verbatim confession of conspiracy, bribery, and child endangerment. He had sealed his own fate with his own arrogant tongue. I reached into my pocket and pressed the button on the transmitter. "Did you get all of that, Julian?" I asked the empty air. A beat later, my encrypted phone vibrated on the table. A single text message from the special agent appeared on the screen, loud and clear. Dubai authorities have already been notified to flag his passport. He is not going anywhere. I stood up, adjusting the belt of my coat. The test was over. Marcus had failed spectacularly. There was no more hesitation, no more mercy, and no more hiding. Tomorrow night, the Harbor Hotel ballroom would be packed with Boston's elite, all gathered to celebrate the total destruction of my life. I walked out of the coffee shop, my stride perfectly measured. Let them dress in their finest silk and diamonds. Let them prepare for a magnificent coronation. They had no idea they had just invited their executioner to the main stage. Saturday night arrived with a biting coastal wind that whipped off the harbor, but inside the grand ballroom of the Harbor Hotel, the atmosphere was suffocatingly warm and dripping with stolen wealth. The Harbor Hotel was a fortress of old Boston money, all vaulted ceilings, gold leaf molding, and massive crystal chandeliers that cast a fractured, glittering light over the city's most powerful people. Chad had spared absolutely no expense for the launch of the Thornton Global Initiative. The room was packed to capacity with the exact demographic he needed to legitimize his massive fraud. There were state senators, corporate investors, tech billionaires, and local media personalities all circulating with flutes of vintage champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that they were providing the social camouflage for an international crime syndicate. Waiters in pristine white jackets glided through the crowd carrying trays of caviar and truffles. A string quartet played softly from a raised balcony. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, a dazzling multi-million-dollar illusion designed to wash $70 million of cartel blood money right under the noses of the local authorities. I stepped out of the unmarked federal town car at exactly 8 o'clock. The valet rushed forward to close my door, his eyes widening slightly as I turned toward the hotel entrance. The hysterical, broken housewife my family expected to see tonight was entirely gone. I had shed the tired, stressed mother persona like a second skin. In its place was the woman they had never bothered to get to know. I wore a striking, custom-tailored crimson gown that moved like liquid fire against the marble steps. The color was a deliberate choice, an absolute visual rebellion against my mother's command to wear something cheap and forgettable. I wore my dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant knot, my posture rigid, my expression wiped clean of any emotion. I was not walking into this hotel to beg for mercy. I was walking into a war zone. My fingers rested lightly on the clasp of my black designer clutch. The small structured bag held the entire arsenal required to execute their downfall. Tucked carefully against the silk lining was the fraudulent quitclaim deed Chad needed me to sign. Next to the deed was a microscopic military-grade audio transmitter wired directly to a secure frequency. Every breath I took, every word I spoke, and every threat they whispered was currently broadcasting crystal-clear sound to Special Agent Julian Miller and his heavily armed tactical team who were sitting in blacked-out surveillance vans 3 blocks away. And resting perfectly flat against the bottom of the clutch were 3 heavily folded judge-signed federal arrest warrants. I moved gracefully up the grand staircase and approached the velvet ropes cordoning off the ballroom entrance. 2 massive private security guards flanked the doorway, checking names against a digital tablet. Behind them, the dull roar of elite networking echoed from the main floor. "Name," the guard asked, his tone clipped and professional. "Maya Thornton." I replied, my voice steady and cold. The guard scrolled the tablet, his brow furrowing for a fraction of a second before he tapped the screen and unhooked the heavy velvet rope. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. I pushed through the massive gilded doors and stepped into the lion's den. I did not linger in the shadows. I did not keep my head bowed. I squared my shoulders and glided directly into the center of the room, parting the sea of black tuxedos and glittering diamonds with a quiet, lethal authority. Conversations slowed as I passed. Heads turned. The local media photographers trained to spot the most arresting visuals in the room immediately snapped a rapid succession of photos as my crimson gown cut a brilliant path through the sea of monochrome suits. I scanned the massive space, tracking my targets. I found them standing near the main stage, positioned directly beneath a massive silk banner bearing the logo of their fake charity. It was the perfect portrait of a powerful philanthropic dynasty. Chad was holding a glass of scotch, laughing expansively at a joke told by the district attorney. He looked every inch the billionaire savior, projecting a magnetic, effortless charm. Next to him stood Chloe, wearing a sheer, obscenely expensive silver gown that caught the flash of the cameras. She was posing with a local news anchor, performing the role of the devoted, charitable socialite flawlessly. Vivian hovered just behind them, draped in emerald silk and heavy diamonds. She was drinking in the reflected status, looking down her nose at a passing server while practically vibrating with toxic pride. And standing slightly apart from the group was Marcus, checking his phone with an expression of supreme boredom. He was dressed in a pristine tuxedo, mentally already halfway to his luxury penthouse in Dubai, confident that his $2 million betrayal had secured his permanent freedom. I kept my pace measured and deliberate as I closed the distance between us. Chloe was the first to see me. She turned away from the news anchor, her practiced camera-ready smile still plastered on her face. Her eyes locked onto the crimson gown traveling upward to my face. I watched the exact second her arrogant triumph fractured. The smile slid off her mouth, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. She blinked, gripping her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles turned white, unable to reconcile the lethal poised woman approaching her with the shattered victim she had mocked in the conference room. Her sudden stillness caught Vivian's attention. My mother turned her head, her gaze sweeping over the crowd until it slammed into me. Vivian's jaw tightened audibly. Her eyes narrowed into slits of absolute fury. I was not cowering. I was not crying. I was commanding the attention of the entire room, entirely defying the narrative of the pathetic, unstable sister they had sold to the public. Chad noticed the sudden shift in the women's demeanor and followed their line of sight. The billionaire philanthropist mask faltered for a microsecond before his eyes darkened with a cold, predatory warning. He nudged Marcus, who finally looked up from his phone. The 4 of them stiffened, forming a solid barricade of corruption, greed, and malice, watching as I walked directly into their trap. They believed I was walking into their snare, completely unaware that the jaws of the trap belonged to me. I stopped 3 feet away from them, holding Chad's lethal gaze without blinking. "I brought the deed, Chad," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the ballroom, ensuring the hidden microphone captured every single syllable. "Just like you ordered. Are we doing this on the main stage, or would you prefer to complete the transaction in private?" Chad leaned in, the intoxicating scent of expensive scotch and raw arrogance rolling off his breath. His voice dropped to a low velvet whisper, meant only for me, perfectly calculated to project warmth to the onlookers while delivering a concrete threat. "Publicly, Maya," he murmured. "We are doing this under the brightest lights possible. I want every camera in this room to document your generous contribution. Transparency is the core of our foundation." He stepped back, his shark-like grin returning as he gestured expansively toward the podium. Chloe was already moving. She glided across the polished wood of the stage, adjusting the microphone with practiced grace. The string quartet faded into a seamless silence. The low hum of networking, the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, and the quiet murmurs of Boston's political elite all died away. The entire ballroom turned its collective attention to the center stage. Chloe gripped the edges of the podium. She looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, taking a deep, shuddering breath. It was a masterful, terrifyingly flawless performance. I watched a single, perfectly timed tear slip down her cheek, catching the harsh, brilliant light of the media cameras positioned at the back of the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Chloe began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Tonight is about hope. Tonight is about healing. But for my family, tonight is deeply, painfully personal." She paused, wiping away the tear with a manicured finger. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. "For years, we have watched someone we love suffer," Chloe continued, her voice echoing through the massive gilded space. "My sister Maya has been battling severe mental illness. It has been a dark, terrifying road. A road filled with confusion, paranoia, and heartbreaking instability. We have tried everything to help her, to bring her back to the light. We have prayed, we have wept, and we have waited." I stood frozen at the base of the stage. Every eye in the room pivoted toward me. I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of their collective pity. I felt the judgment. I felt the quiet, murmuring validation of the narrative my family had spent months constructing. A mentally unstable woman. A broken wife. A tragic figure. But out of that profound darkness, Maya has found incredible strength, Chloe said, raising her voice to a triumphant emotional pitch. She has bravely decided to turn her personal tragedy into a beacon of hope for others. Tonight, Maya is donating our family's historic estate, a property valued at over $4 million, directly to the Thornton Global Initiative. Her sacrifice will fund groundbreaking mental health research. Her sacrifice will save lives. The ballroom erupted. The applause was deafening. It washed over me in crashing, rhythmic waves of sound. Let them clap, let them cheer, let them buy every single word of this toxic, orchestrated lie. I looked past the clapping hands and found Vivian standing near the front row of VIP tables. My mother was beaming, dabbing at her completely dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, soaking up the reflected glory of her daughter's supposed philanthropy. Beside her, Marcus offered a slow, predatory smile. He gave me a slight, mocking nod, silently commanding me to walk up the stairs and surrender my life. They were entirely convinced that I had been broken. They were entirely convinced that the threat of a public breakdown combined with Marcus's threat of taking my son had forced me into absolute terrified submission. Chad stepped up to the podium, placing a supportive, brotherly arm around Chloe's shoulders. He looked down at me, his eyes gleaming with the sheer, unadulterated thrill of the kill. He extended his hand, gesturing for me to join them on the stage. "Come on up here, Maya," Chad urged, his voice booming over the speakers. "Come, let these people thank you for your incredible generosity." I took the first step. Every flash of the media cameras illuminated the faces of my betrayers. Every step I took brought me closer to the center of their laundering operation. Every second that passed was another second of audio perfectly recorded by the federal transmitter humming against my collarbone. I climbed the stairs to the stage, the heavy crimson silk of my gown sweeping across the polished floorboards. The applause swelled again as I reached the podium. Chloe reached out to hug me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders and pressing her cheek against mine in a display of overwhelming sisterly affection. "Smile, you crazy bitch," Chloe whispered directly into my ear, her voice a venomous hiss completely masked by the cheering crowd. "Sign the paper and disappear." She pulled away, offering the audience a radiant, watery smile. I did not smile back. I kept my face entirely neutral, an impenetrable mask of cold stone. Chad moved in, sliding a thick, leather-bound folder onto the podium. He flipped it open, revealing the quitclaim deed. It was the final puzzle piece. The physical anchor they needed to wash $70 million of Sinaloa cartel money through domestic charities without triggering a federal audit. He pulled a heavy solid gold fountain pen from his breast pocket and held it out to me. Right on the dotted line, Maya Chad murmured, tapping the signature block, his voice low enough that the microphone barely caught it. Give the people what they want. I looked down at the contract. I looked at the gold pen. Then I looked out at the blinding wall of camera flashes, the sea of wealthy elites, the oblivious politicians, and the carefully constructed illusion of the Thornton family empire. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I unclasped my black designer clutch. I bypassed the spare ink cartridge. I bypassed my phone. I slipped my fingers around the crisp, heavily stamped federal documents resting at the very bottom of the bag. The applause began to die down, replaced by a subtle ripple of confusion as the silence stretched on, a fraction of a second too long. Chad pushed the pen closer to my hand, his shark-like smile tightening at the corners, a flicker of genuine irritation crossing his features. Maya, he hissed under his breath, sign it. I raised my head. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest television camera, ensuring my face was perfectly framed, perfectly composed, and completely devoid of fear. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the federal arrest warrants. I ignored the solid gold pen trembling in Chad's outstretched hand. I did not look at the quitclaim deed resting on the velvet podium. I simply reached forward and wrapped my fingers around the sleek silver neck of the microphone, adjusting it precisely to my height. The sharp screech of audio feedback cut through the ballroom, sudden and piercing, instantly silencing the remaining polite murmurs of the crowd. Thank you, Chloe, I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted gold leaf ceilings. Thank you, Chad. Your concern for my well-being is truly staggering. I turned my gaze out to the sea of wealthy donors, state senators, and local media. I maintained perfect posture, projecting the absolute authority of a woman completely in control of her domain. But before I sign away my inheritance and my family's historic estate, I felt it was only right to offer something in return. As a senior financial advisor, I brought a little gift for the donors tonight. Let us look at the real financials of this charity. I slipped my hand back into my designer clutch and withdrew a small black remote control. I did not break eye contact with the camera lenses flashing in the back of the room as I pressed the primary button. The massive digital projector screen hanging above the stage flickered. The elegant gold-embossed logo of the Thornton Global Initiative vanished instantly. In its place, a blindingly bright, highly detailed forensic flowchart illuminated the entire ballroom. It was a masterpiece of financial tracing, an undeniable, irrefutable web of corporate shell companies, offshore wire transfers, and domestic laundering nodes. A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. I watched the realization hit the front row of VIP tables. What you are looking at, I announced, my voice cutting through the rising tide of shock, is the exact routing of $70 million. This capital did not originate from philanthropic donors. It originated from the Sinaloa cartel. It traveled through 3 distinct Cayman Island shell companies, bounced through a toxic wealth management firm in Geneva, and landed directly in the personal offshore accounts of the man standing to my left. I pointed directly at Chad. The color completely drained from his face. His perpetual arrogant tan shifted to a sickly, ash-gray pallor. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin a lie, to call security, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The shark had finally been pulled out of the water, suffocating under the blinding light of federal evidence. And the man standing to my right, I continued pivoting my gaze to Marcus, accepted a $2 million bribe from those exact same cartel funds to manufacture a domestic crisis, declare me mentally incompetent, and secure the legal rights to my property to finalize the laundering process. Turn that screen off! Vivian shrieked from the front row, her emerald silk gown trembling as she lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger at the stage. Turn it off right now! She is insane! Do you not see she is having a psychotic break? I smiled. It was a brilliant, cold, and razor-sharp smile. I pressed the second button on the remote. I am not insane, Mother, I replied smoothly. I am just thorough. The massive surround sound speakers that had previously played soft classical music crackled to life. The crystal clear audio from the baby monitor I had hidden in my own home weeks ago blasted through the ballroom. The acoustics of the five-star hotel amplified every treacherous, undeniable syllable, broadcasting their conspiracy to every journalist, investor, and politician in the room. Chad's recorded voice boomed across the crowd. "We need the property, Marcus. The cartel is losing patience. If we do not wash this 70 million through the charity foundation using her brownstone as the anchor asset, I am a dead man. And you do not get your 2 million. Marcus's recorded voice followed, dripping with callous disregard. I am handling it. I have the doctors lined up to sign the psychiatric evaluation. I will take full custody of Leo by Friday. Vivian is backing my play. Once Maya is locked in a psychiatric facility, I gain power of attorney and I will sign the deed over to you myself. She will never see her son again." The recording echoed off the marble pillars. The structural repetition of their own words, their own plotting, and their own absolute malice hung over the crowd like a heavy, suffocating blanket. This was not a private family dispute. It was a public spectacle, a televised execution of their social and financial lives. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The polite, wealthy donors transformed into a panicked mob. State politicians scrambled backward, desperately shouting for their aides to get them out of the room before the media could photograph them standing anywhere near cartel associates. Investors dropped their champagne flutes, the crystal shattering against the polished floorboards in a deafening cacophony of breaking glass. The media cameras went into an absolute frenzy. The flashing lights became a continuous, blinding strobe effect. They were capturing the exact moment the Thornton dynasty evaporated into dust. Journalists shouted questions over the uproar, demanding answers from the frozen figures on the stage. I stood motionless at the podium, a solitary figure in crimson, watching the destruction unfold with profound satisfaction. I looked at Chloe, the sister who had mocked my pain, who had stood on this very stage crying crocodile tears just moments ago, was now clutching her face in her hands. Her silver gown trembled violently as she stared in sheer terror at the flowchart detailing her husband's crimes. The glamorous socialite facade was entirely gone, replaced by the stark realization that she was married to a dead man walking. I looked at Vivian, the mother who had sold out her own daughter, who had conspired to steal her own grandson, for a shred of social status, was gripping the edge of a VIP table. She was gasping for air as the elite society she worshipped recoiled from her in absolute disgust. The wealthy friends she had spent decades cultivating were actively running away from her, treating her like a contagious disease. And I looked at Marcus, my husband, the man who had plotted to steal my child and abandon me to a federal prison. He was backing away from the stage, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits, the illusion of his unearned superiority completely shattered. The custom-tailored suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume on a cornered desperate rat. They had wanted a spectacle. They had wanted a public stage to finalize my destruction and steal my legacy. I had simply accommodated their request, rearranging the set pieces to suit my own design. The forensic flowchart continued to glow brightly behind me, a massive digital monument to their greed. The audio loop of their criminal conspiracy played a second time, the structural repetition driving the nails of justice deeper into their coffins. I did not need to run. I did not need to shout. I simply stood at the podium holding the remote and watched the fire I had ignited consume their entire world. The sheer magnitude of the evidence projected on the screen acted like a bomb detonating in a crowded theater. The polite veneer of Boston high society shattered instantly. Men in tailored tuxedos shoved past each other, desperately scrambling over overturned chairs to distance themselves from the stage. Women in designer gowns abandoned their diamond-studded clutch bags on the floor, sprinting toward the grand mahogany exit doors. The collective gasp of horror mutated into a deafening roar of absolute panic. They were not just running from a scandal. They were running from the undeniable proof of federal crimes and cartel association. Chad stood frozen for exactly 5 seconds. I watched his eyes track the forensic flowchart, his pupils dilating as he processed the terminal reality of his situation. The $70 million was exposed. The Sinaloa syndicate would demand a repayment he could never provide. His fake aristocratic empire was dead. The blood rushed to his face, turning his complexion a violent mottled purple. The shock morphed into a rabid animalistic rage. "You ruined me!" he roared, his voice cracking with pure malice. He spat a string of vile, hateful racial slurs, the mask of the cultured philanthropist burning away to reveal the feral thug underneath. "I will kill you myself. I will rip you apart." He lunged across the stage. His hands formed tight, white-knuckled fists aimed directly at my throat. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before his polished Italian leather shoes could cover the final 3 feet between us, the massive double doors of the ballroom exploded inward. The heavy oak panels slammed against the marble walls with a sound like a thunderclap. Federal agents. Nobody move. Special Agent Julian Miller's voice tore through the chaos, amplified by a tactical bullhorn. A dozen heavily armed FBI agents flooded into the opulent room, their dark tactical gear cutting a stark, terrifying contrast against the gold-leaf decor. The string quartet players dropped their instruments and raised their hands. The remaining guests froze in place, silenced by the overwhelming show of federal force. 2 agents vaulted onto the stage. Chad did not even have time to register their presence before a shoulder caught him squarely in the chest. He was lifted off his feet and slammed face first onto the polished floorboards of the stage. The sickening crack of his nose breaking echoed over the remaining crowd. An agent drove a knee into his spine, yanking his arms backward. The harsh metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs snapping closed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Marcus tried to run. He spun toward the heavy velvet curtains concealing the kitchen entrance, abandoning his $2 million dream and his cartel partners in a desperate bid for self-preservation. He made it exactly 4 steps. Agent Miller tackled him from behind, driving him hard into a table of champagne flutes. Crystal shattered into 1,000 pieces as Marcus crashed to the ground. Miller hauled him up by the collar of his custom suit, slamming him face first against the nearest marble pillar and securing his wrists in iron. "Chadwick Thornton and Marcus Vance," Agent Miller announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You are under arrest. The charges are federal money laundering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." To my left, a high-pitched, hysterical shriek pierced the air. Chloe was backing away from a female federal agent, her hands raised defensively in front of her sheer silver gown. "Do not touch me!" Chloe screamed, her perfectly contoured face contorted into a mask of pathetic terror. "I am an influencer. I run a charity. I am a victim here. My husband lied to me. I had absolutely nothing to do with this." The agent did not pause. She gripped Chloe's wrists, spinning her around and securing the cuffs tightly. "Chloe Thornton, you are being detained under the RICO Act," the agent stated calmly, pulling a laminated sheet of paper from her tactical vest. "Furthermore, I am serving notice of immediate asset forfeiture. Every bank account in your name has been frozen. Your vehicles are currently being impounded. This diamond necklace," the agent tapped the heavy stones around Chloe's neck, "is seized as the direct proceeds of criminal enterprise. And per federal mandate regarding fraudulent charity operations, all of your social media accounts and digital domains have been permanently seized by the Department of Justice." Chloe's knees buckled. The loss of her freedom was secondary. The loss of her audience, her digital validation, and her stolen wealth was a fatal blow. She wailed, a primal, guttural sound of pure agony, as the agent began unhooking the diamonds from her throat. I looked down from the podium. Vivian was still standing near the front row, but the arrogant, toxic matriarch was entirely gone. She was trembling violently, her emerald silk dress shaking as she surveyed the total annihilation of her social standing. Her favorite daughter was in handcuffs. Her wealthy son-in-law was bleeding on the stage. Her complicit partner in the custody plot was pinned against a pillar by the FBI. Vivian looked up at me. The woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was unlovable, incompetent, and weak, suddenly dropped to her knees on the ballroom floor. "Maya," She begged, her voice cracking with desperate, pathetic tears. Maya, please, you have to tell them I did not know. You have to tell them I am innocent. I am your mother. Please, Maya, have mercy. I will do anything. I stared down at the woman groveling at my feet. I thought about the years of psychological torture. I thought about the gaslighting. I thought about the way she smiled when she planned to take my son and erase me from his life. You wanted to institutionalize me, I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. You wanted to steal my son. You wanted to destroy my life. I reached into my designer clutch one final time. I pulled out a separate, heavily stamped federal document and held it up so the stage lights caught the seal of the Department of Justice. I do not have mercy, Mother, I stated, stepping down from the podium to stand directly above her. I only have warrants. This is an active federal warrant for your immediate arrest. The charges are medical fraud, criminal conspiracy, and the bribery of licensed psychiatric professionals. Vivian let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Agent Miller approached, his boots loud against the marble. He looked at Vivian with utter disgust. Vivian Thornton, he said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Put your hands behind your back. I turned away as the steel clicked shut around my mother's wrists. The ballroom was completely secure. The cartel money was frozen. The monsters who had tried to bury me were now facing decades in federal prison. The fire had burned everything to ash, and I was the only one left standing. The perp walk was a masterpiece of poetic justice. Chad was dragged out first. The blood from his broken nose stained his pristine white collar, his expensive Italian loafers dragging across the shattered crystal on the floor. He thrashed against the federal agents, screaming profanities and demanding to call his lawyers, but his threats dissolved into panicked gasps as the media cameras aggressively crowded his face. Every flash illuminated his absolute ruin. Marcus followed. The smug, calculated psychological abuser was completely gone. He was weeping. Actual, genuine tears streamed down his face as Agent Miller shoved him toward the exit. He tried to turn his head to hide from the local news anchors broadcasting the raid live, but the sheer volume of cameras made it impossible. The man who had meticulously planned to gaslight me into an asylum was now publicly documented as a sobbing, broken criminal. Then came Chloe. Stripped of the seized diamond necklace, her wrists securely handcuffed behind her back, she looked completely unrecognizable. The federal agents marched her past the very VIP tables she had just commanded. Her former friends, the elite socialites she had spent years desperately trying to impress, literally turned their backs on her. They held up their phones recording her humiliation, whispering viciously as she was escorted out of the ballroom. She begged them to stop recording her voice cracking, but her pleas only fueled the spectacle. Her digital empire died right there on the marble floor. Finally, Vivian. My mother did not walk out with any shred of dignity. 2 agents had to physically support her by her arms because her legs refused to hold her weight. She kept craning her neck, desperately searching the crowd for me, pleading for her daughter to intervene. I did not step forward. I simply stood by the podium, my arms crossed, maintaining a cold, impassive gaze as the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom slammed shut behind her. The silence that fell over the remaining federal agents and the shell-shocked hotel staff was the sound of total, undeniable victory. 6 months later, the Boston air was warm and heavy with the scent of blooming hydrangeas. I stood on the wraparound porch of the historic family brownstone, resting my hands against the freshly painted white railing. The property did not look like a sterile high-end boutique. It did not look like a cartel laundering node. It looked like a fortress of hope. I had spent the last half-year systematically gutting the interior and rebuilding it entirely on my own terms. A heavy brass plaque was now bolted next to the grand oak entryway. It read, "The Eleanor Initiative Legal and Financial Advocacy for Survivors." I had taken the $70 million in federal reward money I received for exposing the cartel operation and poured it directly into a fully staffed clinic. Inside, top-tier attorneys and financial auditors worked pro bono untangling the complicated webs of financial abuse, securing restraining orders and fighting for women who had been told they were crazy, worthless, or trapped. I gave them the exact weapons I had used to save myself. Laughter pulled my attention toward the manicured front lawn. Leo was running full speed across the grass, chasing a brightly colored soccer ball. He was safe. He was completely untouched by the poison of Marcus and Vivian. The shadows that used to haunt his eyes when he lived in a house filled with tension were completely gone. He kicked the ball into a small pop-up net and turned to me, throwing his arms in the air with a massive gap-toothed smile. I smiled back, waving my hand, feeling an overwhelming surge of profound, uncomplicated love. I picked up my digital tablet from the wrought iron patio table and refreshed the primary newsfeed. The trial had concluded yesterday, but the media coverage was still dominating every major outlet. I tapped the lead video article, adjusting the volume as the anchor's voice drifted over the quiet porch. The federal judge showed zero leniency. Chad and Marcus had both been sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The anchor detailed how the judge explicitly cited their conspiracy to commit a mother to a psychiatric ward to facilitate their cartel laundering as an act of profound depravity. There would be no possibility of early parole. They would spend the next 2 decades entirely stripped of their wealth, their tailored suits, and their unearned arrogance. The screen transitioned to a blurry paparazzi-style video shot from the window of a moving car. It showed Chloe. The former luxury influencer and self-proclaimed philanthropist was standing behind the drive-through window of a local fast food franchise. She was wearing a grease-stained polyester uniform and a paper visor, looking utterly exhausted as she handed a paper bag to a customer. The federal court had seized every single asset she owned, liquidating her accounts to pay back the astronomical restitution fines. With her reputation completely annihilated and no access to her previous wealth, the minimum wage job was her only legal option to comply with the court mandate. The broadcast ended with a brief update on Vivian. My mother had managed to avoid a federal prison cell due to a sudden, highly convenient decline in her health, but she was permanently confined under strict federal house arrest. She lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her ankle monitor tracked her every movement. Her bank accounts were frozen. And worst of all, the high society circles she had sacrificed her own daughter to remain part of had entirely blacklisted her. She was a total pariah, isolated in a tiny room, completely alone with her own toxic reflection. I tapped the screen, locking the tablet and setting it face down on the table. The screen went black, erasing their faces and their consequences from my immediate view. They were exactly where they belonged. I picked up my porcelain teacup, taking a slow, grounding sip of Earl Grey. The warmth spread through my chest. I looked out over the sprawling estate, watching the evening sun cast a golden glow over the brick pathways and the ancient oak trees. The air was perfectly still. The threats were neutralized. The lies were exposed. I was no longer the tragic victim they had tried to design. I was the architect of my own absolute justice. I stood on the porch of the house they had tried to steal, watching my son thrive, finally at peace, holding the ultimate unbreakable power. Maya's journey teaches us that true power and security must be built from within. Blood does not automatically make someone family, and shared DNA is never a valid excuse to endure toxic manipulation. When the people supposed to protect you become the architects of your destruction, you must find the absolute courage to be your own savior. Sometimes letting the illusion of a perfect family shatter is the only way to build an authentic, empowered life. True justice isn't merely about exposing the guilty. It is about reclaiming your voice and transforming your deepest trauma into your greatest strength. Share your own experiences of setting firm boundaries with toxic relatives in the comments section below. If this story of reclaiming your power resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering journeys of survival and sweet justice.